Hey my watchers, welcome. Today we are gonna see, what if Harry Potter was raised by Lord GENDALF? Join Patreon for early access exclusive content of Super Op stories. Also contents that's too far for YouTube. You will get 400 content there, please do check that too. Please subscribe this channel, because definitely I will try my best to provide a valuable content for you all. Also check the description to support the original author for this beautiful creation. There were 2 scars that Harry Potter had since before he could remember. He didn't know how he had gotten them, or how they'd come to be so important and special to him. He just felt it within his soul. The first was the lightning bolt-shaped scar across his forehead. The jagged red line healed long ago, but the bright red coloring of scar tissue had never faded. It was unlike anything any child or adult had seen before. It was different, but different to his family meant bad. It was too noticeable. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia always made him keep his hair long to cover the freak mark. The second scar he had was on the left side of his body. A thin white line that ran vertically along his ribcage beneath his arm, all the way past his hip. It was strange. Unlike his other scar, it was barely noticeable, one unbroken line. The silvery, raised skin having healed cleanly left only the slightest blemish on his skin. His chest rarely got sun, so the scar blended in with his skin tone. Even if not noticeable to the eye, he knew it was still there. He had once asked Aunt Petunia about it when he was younger. Her lips had pursed and her eyes narrowed before she blamed the accident which had killed his parents and gave him the first scar. She didn't seem to know much, but the few times he'd asked she'd always got angry and frumpy. He learnt to not ask about it. When he grew up and was told the real reason as to how his parents died, he learnt the story behind only one scar, and his life had irrevocably changed forever. He never gave much thought to that thin scar that ran along his torso again. It had been exactly 3 years since the war had ended. 3 years of quiet peace, with the only odd disturbances being exposure of the wizarding world to muggles, which were easily cleaned up by obliviators and aurors. The British Ministry of Magic had finally finished repairs and allocated compensation to those who had been greatly affected by the war. Everyone had been helping with repairs, funded by the money taken from purebloods and other convicted sympathizers' vaults. One would think that by removing all traces that the war even occurred would help settle this new age of peace, and it did for most of the wizarding world. Yet one Harry Potter couldn't find his peace. He was stuck in a place where his purpose in life, whatever that was supposed to mean, Hermione had been trying to convince him to try new things lately, was lost. After defeating Voldemort, people had begun to move on, slowly but surely. There was hope for them. But for Harry, the one thing driving him, pushing him to be better, was now gone. Mind you, he enjoyed not being the sole savior, the one to ogle at on the street. No, everyone now knew what roles Hermione and Ron played, how Neville had defeated Nagini and in the process a part of Voldemort's soul, and the countless others who had fought at Hogwarts that night. He wasn't the only hero anymore. He never much liked attention, preferring to keep whatever private life he had under wraps. Even the Prophet had stopped writing articles about him. People still stared and many wanted photos and handshakes, but he wasn't hounded like he used to be. 3 years was enough time for society to move on. That is how Harry found himself standing at the edge of the cliffs surrounding Shell Cottage, the sounds of the waves crashing below thundering in time with his pounding headache. The night air was cool, forcing his hands into the pockets of his slacks. He was glad the jumper he wore was thick, as he'd left his jacket inside with his wand on the inside of the breast pocket. The light and dull noise of laughter from inside was like white noise to his outlook over the dark stretched out before him. He knew he should be in there with all the Weasleys and their friends, celebrating another year of peace from the war, another year Voldemort-free. But he couldn't bring himself to. He had sat on a plush chair in the extended living room, listening to the chatter around him as he sipped at his fire whiskey, until the noise started to pain his head and ears. That's when he excused himself from the festivities and left for the front garden. He caught Ginny's eye as he left, shrugging at her raised brow. She shook her head and turned back to her conversation with Luna. He was glad he and Ginny remained friends after the war. Everyone had expected more to blossom between them, but the loss of their friends and family had torn them apart. Some wounds just couldn't heal. As Harry walked through the garden, passing bushes starting to bud with the coming flowers. He stopped only to kneel by the small grave. He brushed a few leaves from the spot, patting the tomb head. "Hope you're enjoying all the socks, Dobby," Harry whispered as he let his hand linger for a moment before getting up and finishing his walk to the cliffs. Harry breathed in deep, filling his lungs till they hurt as he exhaled slowly. He willed the throbbing behind his eyes away, the pain stinging. He had gotten his eyes fixed after the war. His iconic round glasses now rested on the fireplace mantel in Grimmauld Place. He rubbed his eyes and the bridge of his nose with his index finger. The shadows cast by the light of the windows drew his attention to the ground. The stretched black figures moved around in the yellow light, eerily reminding Harry of Dementors as they glided across the grass. Harry stepped closer to the edge, his breath catching in his throat as he looked down into the black, watery depths below, adrenaline pumping. As he did, the pain behind his eyes and the pounding in his head ebbed away. The thrill of it made him laugh breathlessly, and for the first time in a while he felt alive. He knew how wrong that was, to feel anything only by risking his own life. He rolled on the balls of his feet. He wasn't about to plunge off in a swan dive or anything that stupid. He knew better than that. It was enough just standing with his toes near the edge and looking down to feel like he was atop of the world. He didn't notice the way the dirt was crumbling, the rocky edge made unstable with his movements. "Harry, want a glass of bubbles?" Hermione asked from the doorway of the cottage, her face shadowed by the light streaming from behind her. Harry turned to face her, taking a step forward. It was time to rejoin the others, even if that meant smiling that fake happy smile. Next thing he felt was weightlessness. He could hear the shocked cry of Hermione as he fell, the ground he had just been standing on dropping with him in chunks of rock and soil. Harry looked up at the starry sky above and wondered if this was the end. And if it was hardly the way he'd expected his death to be. As his back hit the water, he let out a gasp as pain shot through him, feeling his bones break. The surface of the water had felt like concrete, and it had surely broken his back. As he was plunged into the icy water, he was pulled about by the turbulent waves that crashed over him, tossing him against the rocks hiding beneath the surface. He rolled and struggled to right himself, but he honestly had no clue which way was up and down as he was thrown. As his lungs burned for air, he felt his body stop struggling through the pain, his limbs growing weaker and weaker as he felt his consciousness slip from him. A body washed ashore, the pebbles and rocks cutting into already torn and bloodied flesh. The body was bruised badly and dark hair was matted against the swollen face. Clothes were drenched and ripped, exposing the body to the elements. To passers-by, the body would just be another casualty and they would pay no mind to it. After all, monsters still roamed the lands and the men and women didn't want to get mixed up in it all if they could avoid it. If only one were to venture closer, they would hear the shuddering breathing of the man and realize he was on the brink of death, barely holding on, but alive nonetheless. Because God forbid that Harry Potter was going to give up just yet. Crunching boots on the pebbles brought two men closer, the smaller of the two slowly touching the body, talking to his companion in mumbled tones. Harry was slipping between consciousness and sleep, hearing the foreign language the men were speaking. He felt large hands grip him as he let out a whimper as pain shot through him. God, he was sore. The hands were much more gentle as they turned him, so he was on his back, which Harry was surprised didn't hurt as much as it had when he had first hit the water. He tried to open his eyes, the lids swollen and heavy, and all he was able to make out was a mess of dark hair and two blurry faces.
Erron?
He managed to breathe out between his split lip, tasting the coppery liquid which coated his mouth as he swallowed. The blurred figures were still talking to each other, as Harry tried to continue speaking, but his tongue didn't seem to want to move. A hand on his forehead had him stilling, wondering what was happening and why he was even still alive after a fall like that. The coolness of the hand against his forehead had him fighting to stay awake, his body urging him to give into the darkness and to rest. Reluctantly, Harry let himself fall back into a restless sleep. To all those guys who reviewed the first chapter, this is for you. I was so excited about such positive first reviews that I couldn't help but post the next chapter. Hope you enjoy X. While they had been living in peace, There was seemingly more and more sightings of evil creatures over the years. As soldiers of Gondor, they had a duty to protect those who resided within their lands. Plus, it wasn't like the brothers had much choice. They were young, and their father all but chose the paths that they were to walk in life. To honor and glory, the steward had said. They were astride their beasts, the white tree of Gondor embellished into the tunics they wore. At their side was a sheathed sword, one hand resting on the hilt in case they needing to draw and battle at any moment. They were moving at a leisured pace through the thicket which lined the river banks, following a small animal track. They kept their eyes on the rocky shore of the river. "Brother, up ahead," Faramir whispered as he slowed to a stop, his horse tossing her head in annoyance. Boromir pulled up next to him and stopped. He dismounted his horse, looking up the river bank to the body which laid there. At this distance they couldn't make out much detail, but one thing for sure was that they were either man or elf. "Stay here, Faramir," Boromir said as he kept a hand on his sword, slowly stepping off the trail and onto the pebbled shore. "I want to come too," Faramir said as he dismounted, ignoring the look his older brother gave him. "The man is possibly dying. I'm the one who's adept at dressing wounds," Faramir said as he grabbed a small bag from under his saddle blanket. He was glad his friendship with Gandalf the Grey had allowed him to learn more about the art of healing. While he was no wizard, he could at least help. Boromir looked up the bank to where the body lay still. Faramir ignored his brother. He was still young and headstrong. He knew he had to help because that was the right thing to do. He moved quickly to the body, kneeling down next to the man. He could hear the ragged breath the stranger took, and knew he was a man from the shape of his ears. He reached out to grab the man's shoulders, and he quickly pulled back at the hiss that escaped the bleeding lips. "Boromir, he's alive," Faramir said over his shoulder as his brother approached. "Do you think he's one of the townsfolk?" Boromir couldn't see the man's face. "We have to turn him over." Faramir nodded. This time he gently pushed at the man's shoulder, rolling him onto his back. As he did, he could see the full extent of his wounds, and the bruising that could be seen beneath the torn clothing looked horrible. "Can you hear me? Can you tell me your name, sir?" Faramir asked gently as he looked over the man, not touching him yet as he could hear the hard time the drowned man had breathing. Boromir stood guard, looking around as Faramir began to assess the wounds. Every few moments Boromir would flick his eyes down to the man. Man was hardly the word to describe the stranger. Even with the swollen face and battered body, the kid looked too small, too young. Boromir had to wonder why no one in their lands had reported that one of their own was missing. Even if he'd come from high upstream, the towns there were still Gondor's lands. The man was trying to speak as Faramir hushed him, placing a hand on his forehead. "Boromir, he's burning too hot. We must get him somewhere warm and out of these wet clothes," Faramir said as he took a cloth from his bag and was wiping down the man's face, removing the sediment and dirt that had been sticking to it. Boromir nodded, gesturing for Faramir to move away as he carefully hooked his arms around the bend of the man's leg and around his back, lifting him as smoothly as he could to not jostle him. He could hear the man was breathing at least, but the lack of pain sounds had Boromir thinking he was asleep. "Faramir, go back to Minas Tirith and ready a room at the inn," Boromir ordered as he placed their wounded man face down across the saddle, his body hanging limply across either side of the horse. As he mounted, he moved the man back upright, keeping his head against his shoulder so his head wouldn't loll. "We won't make it that far," Faramir said as he helped Boromir, moving the unconscious man's legs to sit in the saddle properly. He knew the fever would take the man if he wasn't tended to soon. The two men had set the inside of the old farmhouse up to keep the weather out and the warmth in. Boromir tended to a fire made in the old stone fireplace, while Faramir was setting up their saddle blankets and cloaks for the man to lay under. Luckily the place had been boarded up when they arrived, allowing Boromir to break the door in with a shove and find the place relatively usable, if not a little dusty. "What was this farmhouse used for?" Faramir asked in hushed tones, sitting their unconscious man up as he began to remove the woolen pullover he wore. Beneath was a strange tunic of black material, unlike anything Faramir had felt before. It was so silken, with a line of buttons along the front that seemed to hold them together. It was first used to farm crops for Care Andrus, but it was abandoned due to the isolated nature, Boromir replied as he stoked the fire with a stick. The farmers thought the view of Mordor was ominous too. The crops never grew as well as they should have. Once he was sure it was burning nicely, he moved over to help his brother. He helped sit the man up so his head was resting against Faramir's knee, propping the man upright. Faramir was wiping away the blood and dirt from the man's upper torso, revealing the numerous cuts and bruises. Some of the cuts were deep and jagged, but others were shallow, more like grazes. They were still oozing some blood, but it wasn't free-flowing, which was good. The main concern still was the fever. He must have come far down the river, Boromir remarked as he took a cloth and cleaned the wounds on the back. Faramir was cleaning up the dark hair, pushing it back from the forehead and face so he could add salve to the bruises. Across the forehead was a strange red scar. How odd, Faramir said as he ran a finger gently along the red mark. Boromir saw the mark but didn't say anything. It was like the boy was blessed by a strike of lightning. As he continued to gently wipe the back, he could see numerous scars beneath the open wounds. Looks like our man here is no stranger to battle, Boromir commented, which Faramir nodded to. As they cleaned him, it seemed more and more was revealed, to the scar along his inner arm, which was long and jagged, and the strange inscription against the back of his hand. Maybe he's from Rohan? Faramir suggested, grabbing the pot of salve as he began to gently rub the thick goop across the bruises. Faramir hummed in agreement. It was true, the garments worn by the man were strange. Even his pants were unconventional for riding or battle, tight-fitted but not allowing for maneuverability. As they moved the body to shimmy the torn pants off, they were able to see just how thin the man was. He had lean muscle for sure, but hardly the body of a soldier or fighter. Leaving the man in his strange undergarment pants, they finished rubbing salve on the wound and bruises, stopping the wounds being infected from outside elements. The salve was a concoction that Gandalf had shown Faramir when he was young and the wizard had traveled to Gondor. It was made from a selection of plants and a small amount of mead. Gandalf said something in the drink helped with keeping wounds clean. The deeper cuts, Faramir had wrapped some strips of clean cloth around, winding around his chest and back. Around his head they wrapped another cloth as they found the bleeding cuts which matted the dark hair. They tucked the still unconscious man beneath the blankets before the fire, making sure he was close enough to the hearth to feel the heat. Then they settled themselves in for the night, the sun long gone behind the horizon by the time they had finished dressing the wounds. Every time he would wake he could hear men's voices, and he'd try to open his eyes but found that he couldn't. They felt heavy and he struggled to move any part of his body. He felt weighed down and lethargic, which, to be fair, is a normal reaction when the last things he could remember were falling off a cliff into the ocean, being battered against rocks, and being washed ashore in some foreign land. God, he hoped he hadn't washed ashore across the Atlantic, but knowing his luck he probably had. Now he was stranded in some strange far-off land and no one would be able to find him here. He could only hope that Hermione wouldn't kill him for scaring her like that. With those thoughts running through his head, Harry knew he had to get better and wake up so he would find a way home. So, in the darkness he tried to reach out to his magic, feeling and concentrating with all his willpower just to feel that familiar spark. Within him, there was nothing, just emptiness. If he was awake he would have screamed and kicked in frustration. What did this all mean? Was his magic, Merlin forbid he say it, gone? Was that even possible? How could it even have happened? He knew that magic was life to wizards, which is why when a Dementor performed a kiss, the shell that remained of the human, even though living and breathing, wasn't able to perform magic anymore. Magic was tied to the soul and in turn, the soul thrived off magic. He was so screwed. Harry felt a hand caress his face, wiping gently. A deep voice rumbled words he couldn't understand, but the touch familiar. It was gentle and kind, like something Hermione did to wipe his face when he cried. Oh right, he was crying, even in his sleep. He drifted off at the gentle touch of whoever was his carer. After tending to the wounded man, the next morning Boromir had traveled back to Minas Tirith to replenish supplies and to send word to their father that they would be absent. Of course he didn't write the truth about the stranger they had found. Rather, He'd written they were setting up camp in the farmhouse so their patrols would be easier. He didn't wait to hear a response letter, giving the scroll to the messenger boy who'd run it up to the White City. In the lower levels of Minas Tirith, he had bought a cart and laden it with barrels for storage. He'd haggled with a lady in the market for potatoes, onions and grain. It would do enough for some stew and gruel. He was able to purchase a leg of salted goat as well, which would keep for a while. It helped that he was a well-known face around these parts as well, as the woman's young daughter had shyly waved with a smile. Boromir had smirked in response, but did not say anything. He then went to the healer in town, gathering addition supplies that Faramir had instructed he get for their wounded stranger. He'd packed this all up in some spare blankets that the inn had provided him, and then spent the night with a meal and a jug of mead to fill him. In the morning, he started the journey back to the farmhouse. Faramir and Boromir took turns watching the boy, and with no signs of improvement after the fourth night, Faramir was getting worried. "I will ride to the White Wizard to see if he can help, or at least help me find Gandalf the Grey," Faramir had told Boromir, who could only nod. Neither of them were very experienced with healing, and the presence of a stranger in Gondor would alert their father of their disobedience. If they could, they'd keep the stranger out of towns and cities for now. If he turned for the worse, then and only then would they ride. "Ride hard and be safe," Boromir said in goodbye, clutching his brother's shoulder in a show of affection. Faramir nodded before mounting his horse and setting off in a gallop towards the Tower of Isengard. Boromir was left to tend to their wounded stranger for the rest of the days and nights. Harry had thought of many reasons as to why he couldn't feel his magic. He had knocked his head too hard and knocked the magic right out of him, and now he was a squib. He had somehow had it stolen from him by some on-the-run Death Eaters as karma for killing Voldemort. Every excuse was becoming more and more extreme, and while he knew it was stupid, they made him feel a little better, thinking that whatever had happened was out of his control and was the result of some greater forces at play. He had to calm his frantic thoughts down. The evidence he had would point to the most obvious. That was when he fell, he should have surely died. Yet here he was. Or was he? He still didn't know if this was reality or if he did die and this blackness was hell. If the fall was to have killed him or surely have broken his back, he could tell he was laying on his back and there was barely any pain. So did his magic all go to fixing his back and keeping him alive underwater that whole time? He didn't even know how far he had gone and been pulled by the tide. So his magic could have been sustaining him for days. Would that be long enough to drain his whole magical core? Who knows, maybe Hermione would know. If she were to ever find him. Damn it, he was getting emotional again. Those gentle hands were there once more, brushing the hair from his forehead. When Harry was finally able to open his eyes, it was to a bright light that burned, making him wince as he lifted his hand to shield it from his face. He turned away from the light streaming in between the cracks in the boards against the windows, facing the fire. The light and warmth of the fire had him sighing contently. As he opened his eyes, slowly this time, he blinked a few times as if to stretch the muscles in his face. He gingerly touched his face, wincing as he felt the swollen state and the cut above his eyebrow had crusted, which made it harder to blink. All he smelt was something like mint but not as strong. He laid still for a while, assessing and processing all this now that he was conscious. He lifted a hand above his face, staring at the scabs on his hands. He tried to focus internally, reaching out for his magic. Harry sighed sadly as he felt nothing, just emptiness. He felt so vulnerable and bare without his magic. He'd spent 20 years with his magic, even if 11 of them he hadn't know about it. He tried to move to sit up but winced as he felt pain shoot through him. He breathed out slowly, rolled over, then every so gently he lifted himself up with his hands, looking around him. They were in a hut of some sort, with the fire before him providing heat, but there was little furniture except for a table and chairs. On the far side of the room was a bed large enough for two, which had a cloak draped over the end of the bed, and the sheets were a mess. So he wasn't alone. The opposite wall was lined with large wooden barrels, raised up from the floor on makeshift pallets. Above the barrels was shelves with brown glass corked bottles and jars of different shapes and sizes. Harry looked down at the blankets he was piled under. It was then he realized he was shirtless. Peeking beneath the blankets, he was glad he was at least wearing his boxers. Looking over himself, he saw the bandages and the mottled green bruises, some splotches of yellow and a deep purple peppered along the skin. He lifted the bandage around his chest, seeing the dried, putty-like stuff against his skin. Even though he was sure he looked a mess, he felt better than he knew he looked. Maybe he did sacrifice his magic to be here, but of all the places did it have to be so old-looking? Harry had to think. He had washed ashore some strange primitive land, as there wasn't a sign of lights or electronics at all. The door opened, startling Harry. A tall man with dark hair walked in, his arms laden with blocks of wood. He was wearing a white tunic and what looked like leather riding pants, although Harry couldn't really tell in the light. The man, seeing him awake, began to speak. Harry frowned, not able to pick the language at all. "I'm sorry, I don't speak your language," Harry spoke softly, gesturing to his throat. "English? Do you speak English?" The man said something again as he placed the wood in a pile near the fireplace, his back to Harry. He finally turned, allowing Harry a good look at him. The man was tall, broad-shouldered with a muscular build. He had dark brown hair and piercing gray eyes that reminded him eerily of a certain Slytherin. The man had a handsome face, nothing overly out of place, with heavy brows and thin lips. He seemed to be taking Harry in too, as he crouched down, looking him over. Harry felt like he was some animal at a zoo under the scrutiny. "What?" Harry said as the man continued to stare. The man said a string of sentences again which Harry scrunched his face up at, ignoring the pain. This was going to be annoying. "Don't understand. You," Harry said slowly, pointing at the man and then to himself, shrugging in a universal gesture of, "What the hell is going on?" The man frowned, a few lines forming between his brows and around the corner of his eyes. As Harry looked at him, he had to guess he was in his 30s? It was hard to tell with the man's tan skin. The man scowled and muttered to himself, standing as he went back to the door, walking outside, gesturing for Harry to follow. Harry was hardly one to stay cooped up, so he stood slowly, testing his weight, and was glad to feel that he wasn't in any immense pain, meaning no broken bones. Wrapping one of the blankets around himself, he walked barefoot across the hard stone floor and out the door. The story is beginning to pick up in pace, and I will be giving further explanation in chapters about the dates and years for reference. For now, however, I hope you don't mind being as clueless as Harry. Hope you enjoy X. Outside was blindingly bright and Harry had to squint till his eyes adjusted. What he saw took his breath away. Before him was a large field, tall grass which looked like wheat stretching out before him. Next to the small hut they were in was wooden stables, with a horse within, grazing at a trough. Next to the stables was a cart propped against a wooden block. In the distance he could see large trees clumped together, lining the whole field along the right-hand side, never seeming to end. He could barely hear any noise except the sound of the wind blowing. There was no rumbling of cars or the distant murmur of bustling people. Nothing except the sound he was making as he moved through the grass, one hand running through the tops of the stalks as the other held the blanket at the front. Harry followed the man through the grass, still looking around. Boromir sighed to himself as he watched the boy walk around, following him. The fact that he was speaking some strange language was making this a lot harder than it should have been. It was obvious he was not from these lands, and Boromir had to wonder if he'd come from the realm of elves. He had heard of men being taken in by the elves in the past. He led the stranger towards the creek, knowing that he was following by his soft footsteps. As they approached, Boromir stopped and leant against a tree, gesturing with his hands to the man to go do whatever he needed to. Harry stopped by the bank the man had led him to. He watched him carefully. Was he going to do something? Was he going to kill him and dump his body in the river? The water wasn't that deep from the looks, and it was slowly flowing, so maybe not so great a place to dump a body. Harry raised a brow, the dried salve cracking and falling into his eyes. Harry had to wipe the flakes from his face. "I'll wash those," Boromir said again, reaching down to take the bandages. The man reached out, grabbing them before Boromir could, mumbling words under his breath as he hurriedly moved into the stream of water. Harry was embarrassed. The man was obviously going to grab the dirty bandages from him, for whatever purpose the man was trying to say to him in his native tongue. Harry wasn't going to let him take the bandages before he'd washed them of the dried paste and blood. Harry squatted by the water, leaving the pile of bandages between his feet as he set about washing each one clean. He then carefully laid out the washed cloth against the pebbled shore, hoping they'd dry in the sun. Boromir watched the man as he set about washing them. He watched the way his spine curved as he squatted, the bones slightly poking out. The boy was too thin. Just where had he come from? Harry moved into the water, wincing at the temperature as the hair on his skin rose. He set about to gently washing off the salve, seeing the scabs and wounds were all healing up nicely. He had to wonder just how long he'd been asleep for. He waded into the water, feeling the current flowing against him. By the time he was standing in the middle, the water lapped at his belly button, the clear water shimmering in the sunlight. As he ran his fingers over his skin, washing it all away, he suddenly stopped. Something familiar was gone. Harry lifted his arm up, feeling along his side as he tried to feel the scar that he had had since before he could remember. He felt nothing, just skin with a few scabs from his tumble. There was no thin raised line of scar tissue. The wizard had to frown. How did a scar like that even disappear? He ran his fingers down his side again. Nothing. Harry felt a small part of himself blanch. That was a scar he'd always had. It was as much a part of himself than the lightning bolt above his eye. Thinking about it, Harry quickly washed his face, rubbing the salve away roughly, not caring at the small amount of pain. He stared at his rippled reflection as he heaved a sigh of relief. His famed scar was still there. Why one and not the other, he hadn't the foggiest idea. What it did mean was that something happened when he fell from that cliff, something magically which had removed his scar. Harry continued to wash himself with a small frown. This was all just so strange. He bent over, washing the gunk from his hair and face. As he finished and began to move back to shore, the man was still watching him closely. Harry wished he had his magic so he could spell himself dry, and he was well aware of how his wet boxers clung to his lower half. Quickly wrapping the blanket around his middle, Harry shook his limbs dry before turning back to the man. Lead the way back, I guess?" Harry said as he began to gather the now dry bandages. The man furrowed his brow and said something. "Again, mate, I don't know what you're saying." The man walked forward, taking the bandages from Harry's hands as he placed them down, pulling at the towel at Harry's waist. While Harry all but yelled, flustered by the stranger's action. The man gave a small chuckle under his breath but used the blanket to dry Harry's damp hair. Boromir was amused by the man's reaction. "You have to dry off, otherwise your fever will return." Boromir looked at the man before repeating, "Dry." Harry let the man use the blanket to dry his hair. The man said a word. He gestured to Harry's body. Harry tried to repeat what the man said. "Yes, dry," Boromir said as he pointed at the towel, then to the man's body. Once the man was finished, Boromir waited till he gathered the bandages and then led the way back to the cottage. Harry stopped the man with a hand. He pointed to his chest. "Harry, my name is Harry." Boromir turned and watched and listened to the words. "Harry," said man, pointed at his own chest. He then pointed to the other man. Boromir seemed to get the gist of it. "Boromir. My name is Boromir. Hello all my lovely readers. Hope you enjoy the next chapter, and more is soon to come." Faramir returned to the farmhouse just before sundown when the sky was dusted in reds and purples. He had been riding now for many days. It had taken him over 20 days and nights to journey north through Rohan and to the Tower of Isengard. There, he had sought counsel with the White Wizard on the whereabouts of Gandalf. Saruman had been able to send a raven out to find Gandalf, explaining the bird was under his magic and would search out the Grey Wizard. The raven clutched a scroll in his claw which Faramir had scribbled quickly, asking for help. Saruman had been more than gracious to help the youngest son of the Steward of Gondor. Faramir had the feeling the generosity of hosting him for the night was for political purposes. However, he kept it to himself that he wasn't here on behalf of his father. Saruman didn't have to know that his father was still holding firm in his stance that wizards were untrustworthy and crafty beings. as he rode back from Isengard. He was 3 nights in when Gandalf rode into his small camp astride a beautiful white horse. Gandalf had come from Dale in the north and had been traveling back when he had received Saruman's raven. After explaining the situation in which they had found the wounded man, Gandalf agreed to assist Faramir with the stranger and they began the journey back home. Now, 15 nights later he returned. He pushed open the door, surprised as he saw their man sitting at the table looking very much awake and well. "You're up, that's wonderful," Faramir said as he placed his pack down. Boromir walked over and clapped his brother's shoulder in greeting. "No use talking to him, can't speak a lick of anything. He's been up about 6 days now and we've just gotten by with gesturing. I think he may be—" Boromir looked at the man at the table who was staring at a book Boromir had taken off the shelf. "Simple?" Faramir finished. Boromir frowned. "I don't know. The words coming out are nothing I've heard before and he keeps talking to himself. Did you get help? I'm assuming you are referring to myself as help," Gandalf said with a smile as he appeared in the doorway, finishing up getting the horses some water and feed. "Gandalf the Grey, it's been a long time," Boromir said in greeting, although he did not bow or offer his hand. He had met the wizard a few times, but his brother was closer to him than he was. "Ah, yes it has," Gandalf said as he turned his attention to the other occupant in the room. From what Gandalf could see, the wounds were healing well and the bruises were fading. Gandalf walked forward to the table, seeing the cautious eyes watching him. "Good evening, sir. I see you are doing much better than Faramir told me," Gandalf said as he took a seat across from the man. Harry scooted his chair back slightly, the wood scraping heavily against the stone, looking between the 2 new visitors and Boromir. His instinct told him to be wary of strangers, as always. "Harry, stop that," Boromir said with a sigh. "Is that your name, Harry?" Gandalf said with a smile. "My name is Gandalf. Gandalf the Grey." "Gandalf," Harry echoed as he looked closely at the man before him that reminded him of the old headmaster of Hogwarts. The robes, the hat, the beard. Could Harry even hope that this was someone he could trust? Boromir seemed calm, which was something at least. At first, Harry had tried to leave, but every time Boromir had stopped him with a firm hand, and would proceed to speak to him in a language that Harry couldn't understand. One thing was that Boromir wasn't about to let Harry rush off. The sword the man sharpened at night also let Harry know the consequences of trying to escape again, whether Boromir had said that he'd use it on him or not. The following days had Harry following Boromir around, helping him with anything that he could manage in his injured state. That meant brushing down the horse and cleaning the stables whilst Boromir chopped wood. He would help clean the farmhouse after every meal Boromir would prepare, and Harry had tried to learn the words that Boromir would point out to him. He would even sometimes ask the stoic man questions about things. It was a slow process, but it stopped Harry from going insane thinking about where he even was. Now that he was faced with a man who suspiciously looked the part of a wizard, Harry didn't know if it was cruel stab at his lack of magic or a miracle that brought the man before him. "Are you a wizard? You look suspiciously like one," Harry said as his hands gripped the edges of his chair. Gandalf frowned. "That seems to be a strange language there. So it's not Elvish?" Boromir asked as he leant up against the wall near the door so that Harry wouldn't bolt for it. "No. It is not any dialect I have heard before." Gandalf frowned as he stood, grasping his staff, making his way around the table. Harry saw this and immediately pushed further away on his chair, his hands coming up in defense before him. From his hands grew a bright white light, expanding out from the palms and growing before growing invisible. "Oh my," Gandalf said, startled as he stared at the young man. Raising his staff, he gently tapped the air, a few feet from where Harry was. A bright spark of blue rippled from where the staff hit the air. Harry choked back a sob. His magic had reacted. Instinctively, yes, but it was the only thing he'd felt since he'd first awoken. Boromir straightened, his hand already clasping the handle of his dagger, which was sheathed at his hip. Was Harry a threat? Faramir just watched it all happen in awe. What was the chances that they'd saved another wizard? From what Gandalf had told him when he was young was that there was not many of them, only 5. Gandalf knew all of them, so their stranger wasn't one of them. Harry lifted his hands to his face, feeling the tingle of magic. He had only used wandless magic a handful of times, and that was in the frenzy of battle. So why was it that he had been able to draw his magic, yet he couldn't feel it? It wasn't the same feeling as before, with his magic within his very soul. This magic felt different and yet familiar, quite astounding. Gandalf lamented, "It seems you are in possession of magic, yet you are not one of us." "Us?" Harry asked as his gaze was torn from his hands. "Wizards of the Council," Gandalf said, although the voice in Harry's head whispered another name. "Maya." Harry's eyes proceeding to roll back in his head as his knees buckled and he fell to the floor. Here is another chapter just because I'm so happy with the responses, the faves and the follows for this. All the love to you guys. You make it worth writing stories. Boromir rushed to Harry's side as he suddenly collapsed. Faramir followed his brother. Both quickly stopped by the unseen barrier. "Gandalf, what is this?" Faramir asked as they stood, unable to get closer to Harry. "I believe that your mysterious man you found washed ashore is indeed one of my kind," Gandalf said, leaning against his staff. His mouth was turned up in a smile. "Is that a good thing?" Faramir asked as he saw the smile. "Oh yes, very. If his presence here means anything, it is that there will be a very good reason why you two found him." Boromir was silent as the conversation went on. Harry was a wizard, just like Gandalf, but he hasn't used magic for the past few days. Boromir felt no real threat from him as in a fight. He knew he'd be able to defeat Harry with ease. But magic, that was a whole other story and power that he had nothing to defend himself with. "Well, he seemed surprised when he did. Whatever this is," Faramir commented, waving his hand against the barrier again, watching with awe at the shimmer of air. "Yes, I do believe that this was instinctive, his mind thinking that I was a threat and causing him to throw up this shield." Gandalf went to sit back down again. "I assume we won't be able to get closer till he awakes." "I don't like this," Boromir said with a frown. "How come you have never heard of another wizard? Yet, we find one washed ashore of River Anduin and he cannot speak a word of any language you know?" Faramir did agree with his brother. It was strange that Gandalf had no idea what language Harry spoke. "I do not know everything there is to know, Boromir, son of Denethor," Gandalf said with a frown, "although I will happily take the task, once our young man wakes, of finding out where he has come from." Boromir merely nodded before he turned and walked out the door. Faramir watched his brother go. He didn't have a good feeling about this. Harry awoke to the two new men sitting at the table, both turning at the groan that escaped his lips. "Good to see you awake," Faramir said, gesturing to Harry and making some wild hand movements to mimic waking up. Harry stifled a laugh at the effort the man put in, which only spurred him on to make more gestures and babble in that unknown language. Harry looked around, noting the absence of the familiar face he'd grown accustomed to. "Boromir?" Faramir pointed at the door. He left to go back to Gondor. Looking at the two men, he could see the similarity of the younger man to Boromir. They were obviously related somehow, and Harry could tell they were closer in age than in comparison to Boromir. The older man, with his long beard and dirty gray robes, was still holding his staff, a pipe in his mouth which curled the smoke in strange patterns, swirling before disappearing. "Harry," Gandalf said slowly, "do you know how you came to be here?" Harry watched them as the older man spoke again, his brow furrowed at the unknown words. It was then he stumbled as a voice spoke in his head again. "You can understand me this way, yes? I could see before that you heard my true voice." He could hear what the man was saying to him, albeit it was only in his head, but he had understood. "I can hear you." Gandalf nodded his head and asked his first question again. "Tell me, young wizard, how you came to be in this realm." Harry tried to explain what happened and Gandalf nodded along. Faramir was completely stumped by the two wizards' strange silent conversation, even if both were animated and using facial expressions and hand gestures. Harry's nose crinkled at the title he'd been given. Gandalf chuckled, sensing Harry's uncomfortableness being called such a thing. He felt a deep loss at the prospect of being in another world. His friends would think he was dead from the fall, no body to find within the depths of the ocean. Would they mourn him? Would they set a grave up next to his parents for him? Would Hermione know he was somewhere else, transported to another realm? It was all a bit too much to take in. Yet another, larger part of him felt a large sense of relief. He was no longer the boy who lived twice, or thrice now. He was unknown here but to the three occupants of the room. Yes, he seemed to be the minority again as a wizard, but at least his name did not carry such a heavy burden. He was free here. Alone, yes, but free, which was all he wished for in Britain. GENDALLF sensed the internal commotion Harry was having and let the boy have some thoughts. When Harry seemed to calm, GENDALLF spoke again. My apologies. You are young, however, I have no doubt about your powers. Harry cocked his head to the side in thought. So you say I am one of you? But what does that mean? How come I can't sense my magic anymore? Yet I am able to use it only when threatened. From what you have said about using magic in your realm, you used to have a supply within you, born with it. We were once kin to the Vala. We are, how would say this? Beings? Spirits? Something greater than this human plane at the very least. Then why are you here? Harry asked. I and 4 others were sent by the Vala to assist in the fight against the fallen Sauron. He was once like us, akin to the Vala, but he was corrupted. He has been wreaking havoc through these lands for many years, gaining power once more to fight. I believe that you were sent here by the Vala to assist. How, I do not know. But it is far from coincident that you should travel to our realm and be found by the steward sons of Gondor, of all the people. Is that Boromir and Faramir? Yes, their father sits within the white halls of Gondor until the true king returns. Merlin, of all the places I had to come, it had to be a place with a war and kings and evil godlike beings. GENDALLF chuckled and puffed on his pipe. Do not worry, young Harry. I shall help train you to access magic. Whilst it is different from your old ways, you shall learn quickly that we may wield our magic through the earth and air, fire and water. All things living have magic, do they not? Your previous being was a store for magic. Here, the whole world around you is magic. Harry nodded, surprised and dare he think, excited at the prospect of this new way to learn magic. The story is finally picking up some pace with Harry being introduced to a lot more familiar faces as he goes. I look forward in the coming chapters to see your responses to the meetings. I just want to say as well that as the story starts many years before the Lord of the Rings arc, there will be some time skips coming up which will be marked with the year on them. I don't think any of you want to read about Harry and friends traveling for months on end through Middle-earth. Hope you enjoy the chapter 10. Harry and GENDALLF had been training every day and he was slowly getting stronger. It had taken a week or so to fully heal from his injuries with the help of Faramir and GENDALLF with their salves and herb drinks, which were foul in Harry's opinion, just like potions. GENDALLF had started with simple meditating, a feat which was hard enough as it was to sit still after being comatose for over 3 weeks by what Faramir said. GENDALLF would act as the translator, which made Harry feel less helpless day by day. He was still slowly learning the language, Harry now being taught by Faramir as Boromir had left for Gondor. From what Harry gathered from GENDALLF was the 2 brothers were the son of the steward, a man sitting in place of a king of this area. When Harry questioned where the king was, GENDALLF just puffed his pipe and began the long tale of men and leaves and a war. Harry was intrigued to say the least. A war unlike the one he lived through but similar as well. Seemed no matter which dimension he was in, there would always be men hungry for power. Harry learnt letters and words as he went, always quick to learn and only spurred on by his need to live in this world unaided. If he were to travel this realm and one day find a way home, he was going to do it as if he'd lived here his whole life as a local. Boromir eventually returned as well with more clothes and food. He'd walked into the farmhouse, setting down a bag of potatoes as he felt a tap on his shoulder from behind. Hello. Your journey, safe? Boromir quirked a brow in amusement at seeing the smile on the man's face. GENDALLF chuckled from his spot in a chair near the fire. Yes, my journey was safe. I'm impressed with how quickly you are catching on to our language. Harry frowned, only catching some of it, but he knew the word you and language, so he smiled again. GENDALLF. Try hard to teach me, Harry said as he stumbled over the pronunciation. Faramir too. Help me. Boromir let a small smile grace his face. Keep up the hard work and you'll soon be fluent. Harry grinned broadly. Harry work hard. Said man went back to the table and his books again, poring over them diligently as his fingers traced the words as he tried to read them. Time seemed to fly by, and with each passing day, Harry grew more knowledgeable in magic. His strength was returning, and his learning of the language enabled him to hold conversations at length. Yes, said conversations were only on the weather and the scenery, but it was a start. With this time, his relationships with the men who would come and go from the farmhouse were growing. Gandalf was the mentor that Harry wished Dumbledore had been. Gandalf did not hold back information to keep him safe. Rather, he encouraged Harry to learn to find the answer himself. If he needed help, Gandalf would readily give it. He was kind and patient and gave praise and encouragement when needed. If Harry needed someone to speak with, Gandalf was there with all his wisdom to help him come to terms with his passing into this new world. Harry had even willingly shared his past with the man and the role he played in the Wizarding War. The man had listened and offered him kind words, but never once undermined Harry's ability, instead offering him hope as he had been chosen by the Vala to be here. They would find the reason why together. Faramir reminded Harry so much of his first and dear friend Ronald Weasley that at first it had hurt. Their physical appearance was vastly different, but their personalities were similar. The unwavering loyalty, the friendly grin that was slightly lopsided, the eagerness to help him whenever he was stuck, the bickering that he didn't understand with his brother. But, as the weeks passed, Harry was able to see more to the man. The way he was guarded when it came to his father, or the way Boromir was a whole another story. Boromir took it on himself to teach Harry how to handle a sword, so between the reading and magic, he would spar with the soldier. It was grueling and hard and unlike any other previous training he'd done, but it was satisfying. Seeing his own strength improve until he finally was able to get a win over Boromir had him elated. The smirk which had crossed Boromir's face as Harry pressed the sword against the Gondorian's neck had his own grin widening. Harry was fast, agile, and flexible, and so he soon learnt how to use that to his advantage against the larger, broader male. It had been months since Harry had first awoken in this strange land. If what Gandalf had said was true, he had been here nearly 7 months. He was fluent in the language now and could hold a conversation about the Great War or the customs of the dwarves of Moria, or about the politics of Gondor and Rohan, the 2 realms of men. He still spent many days reading books which Faramir or Boromir would bring back from their trips home to Minas Tirith. He had fashioned himself a staff of his own, smaller and more in the image of a wand, which amused Gandalf to no end. It was a gnarly length of wood with knots formed in ridges which fit well beneath his fingers. It was longer than his last wand, but still able to fit up his sleeve. Gandalf had commissioned from the tailor in Minas Tirith some riding clothes. Harry had foregone the robes which Gandalf agreed with, it would point too much to being a wizard. He instead had a few pullover tunics in shades of white and gray. They were slightly open, around the neck, with a tie at the top to keep it together above a keyhole just beneath his collarbone. A coat made of a rich black was the more formal part of his attire, with a tailored waist and tight cuffed arms that were just loose enough to keep his staff in a holster against his forearm. Gandalf had sewn with a swish of his staff a length of embroidered runes along the hem of the coat which hung around Harry's knees. It was done in a dark green silken thread. To keep him safe, or so Gandalf had said, 2 pair of leather hide riding pants fit his slim build to a T. When he questioned how they fit so well, Gandalf and just chuckled and stated magic. Harry had shivered and was eerily reminded of the weird tape measure Madame Malkin had used, which had occasionally measured the more unsavory places. In time, Gandalf had suggested to travel to a place called Hobbiton, as he has someone he had to see there. He had explained to Harry that the area was also relatively quiet, so they could still practice without worry of anyone seeing them. So, with 2 horses saddled and laden with packs, Harry said goodbye to the farmhouse, and with it, the 2 Gondorian males he'd come to call his friends. I hope you enjoy the next installment. There will be some time skips from now onwards between all the traveling that Harry and Gandalf will be doing, and also to get us to the Lord of the Rings storyline too. Year 3007. Gandalf had left him in Hobbiton after their journey, saying he would be back in a few months, but for Harry to relax here. Most of the hobbits had been wary of him as a stranger, but with time he had proven himself a friend. Plus he kept to himself at Bag End with Frodo and their visitors. The hobbit was a bit of a troublemaker even in his age and frequently liked to pull pranks with the assistance of his cheeky cousins, Meriadoc and Peregrine. Harry had been quick to retaliate, and it had started the never-ending prank war. It had been the best way to be introduced to the lot of them. They soon learnt that surprise would have no effect on the young man, so the tactics had escalated to straight-out attacks which would be avoided with some quick evasive moves. The hobbits were stuck besides themselves on how to trick Harry. So far all their attempts had failed. Harry found it immensely satisfying seeing their scrunched faces after each foiled attempt. Harry slowly learned the way of life of the hobbits and was surprised with how simple it was. He spent the time between study and reading with Frodo fishing by the creek or learning about plants from Hamfast Gamgee. His children were utterly adorable as well, all blonde curls and dimpled cheeks. He had many a dinner with the Gamgee family, and Harry found himself and Sam getting along famously, chatting about the simplest things from cooking to the effects of medicinal plants. The months flew by here, and for the longest time, Harry truly did feel at peace here. It was quiet and the people kept to themselves, but they knew how to have a good time as the sun went down and the drinks were passed around. Harry had never laughed harder than when he had seen Mary scull a tankard of mead, but have a violent sneezing fit in which the contents of said tankard had blasted from the hobbit's nostrils. Of course Harry soon helped soothe the pain of the burning nostrils, but it had taken him a good 10 minutes for his belly to stop aching from laughing. The next day Harry had his tea spiked with some type of hot sauce which had his tongue numb for the rest of the day. After 3 months, as promised, Gandalf returned and Harry had bid his small friends goodbye, with a promise to return as soon as he could. Harry had started to adapt a few of the spells he knew from home, surprising Gandalf with some of their usefulness. The first had been the umbrella charm which had spurted from his wand and settled in a dome above himself and his horse, a product of being miserably wet for days before. His magic had reacted once more on instinct as Harry lamented to himself the wish to be dry. Gandalf had soon copied Harry, and it had made their journey forward easier and, thankfully, drier. The second time Harry had willed it one night when he was on watch whilst Gandalf was sleeping. Harry had been practicing to see if he could do any sort of wards here, ones of protection. Gandalf hadn't heard of such magic. Rather, the Astari magic was simpler and a lot of it was for fighting. Different world, different animals. Idiot. Harry thought to himself, Gandalf chuckling at the unspoken words. With some coaxing and some dried meat, Harry had eventually got the bird to not attack his fingers as he set the wing and with Gandalf's help, healed it. When finished, the bird had nipped at Harry's ear and had taken flight. The falcon, for whatever reason, returned days later, carrying a dead hare in its talons. Harry had felt a pang in his heart as the bird landed on his shoulder and began to preen its healed wing. You should name him, Gandalf had suggested one night around their small fire, huddled into a cave as the rain outside poured heavily. Harry looked at the bird that was sitting on his shoulder, his fingers scratching at the feathers on the chest. The falcon seemed to look at him with those eerie ember-colored eyes as if he knew what was happening. Harry took a moment to think. Arnie's, Harry said softly, stroking the bird's feathers. Gandalf smiled. The journey to Rivendell had been rough with terrible weather. Even with magic to keep the rain off their coats and horses, it didn't stop the mud which coated boots when they dismounted or the wind which whipped at their hair and turned cheeks pink. When they finally arrived, Harry had been awestruck by the sight. He'd never seen such a beautiful place. Added to the fact the magic here felt so old and powerful, it was breathtaking. Welcome to Rivendell, Harry, Gandalf said from his horse as they rode across the bridge to the Elven city. As they approached, a group exited the building, long robes trailing behind as they came to greet them. As they came closer, Harry's breath caught in his throat. They were beautiful, there was no other way to describe it. They dismounted and Harry was able to see them closer up. Pointed ears were the first thing he was drawn to, reminding him of goblins and Cornish pixies. Welcome Gandalf the Grey, old friend, Elrond said as he approached, holding out his hands in welcome. Who is your companion? Rivendell welcomes you, Harry, son of none, Elrond said as Harry winced. That was rude. Harry thought to Gandalf and said man chuckled. Still, not the best of first introductions. Gandalf smiled to Harry and gestured for him to walk closer, around his horse. Elrond seemed taken aback, and the two elves standing behind him started to laugh. Harry was surprised at this, but held his ground. Gandalf just shook his head with a smile. I do apologize for my Harry, he's a bit stubborn. He is still learning. Gandalf said seriously, but his smile betrayed him. Adar, he is right, you shouldn't have said that, one of the elves behind Elrond said. Harry looked at him and the elf next to him and could see they were twins. The identical faces of the males were handsome, with sharp features and long dark hair that fell around their shoulders and chest. I apologize, I did not mean to insult a guest. Elrond said softly, and Harry nodded at his apology. He was being sincere. These are my sons, Elrohir and Elladan. Hello, Harry said with a smile. The twins sent him smiles in response. Elrond continued, and this is Glorfindel and Arister. Pleasure to meet you, Harry said politely at the introductions. Come, you must be weary, Glorfindel said softly, his long blonde hair shimmering like molten silver in the light. Harry was rather entranced. We will have someone tend to your beasts, Elrond stated as he motioned for two elves to come forward and take their horses. Your packs will be taken to your quarters. Now we shall dine in celebration of your return to Rivendell, Gandalf, and for your new companion. Elrond led the group back over the bridge. Harry leant over to look at how far them were up, the rushing of the waterfall echoing in his ears. Careful you don't fall, Elladan said, startling Harry into stumbling and swearing in his native tongue. His clumsiness was rewarded with chuckles from the elf twins. Gandalf's letter to father said you were wanting to study Quenya. Yes? Elrohir said. Yes? Harry said, walking with them as he looked at the twin who spoke. Elrohir, said Elf said, sensing what Harry wanted to ask. Elrohir, Harry let the name roll off his tongue. Yes, there was many books in the language of the elves that Gandalf said I should read. He thought it best that I learn from those who spoke it best. You will have Glorfindel teach you then. He taught all of us, including our sister who you will meet in the hall, Elladan replied, leading the way. He may not look it, but he has lived many lifetimes. Harry nodded. Lifetimes? I heard that, Elrohir, Glorfindel said from the group walking ahead, not turning around. I may be old, but I'm not hard of hearing. Harry laughed outright at the twins. Another chapter for all you guys. Hope you all enjoy X. Year 3008. Harry and Gandalf had been in a Rivendell for many months. As had been said, Glorfindel had become his teacher on Quenya and some Sindarin, which the elves of the other realms spoke, and the customs and history of the elves. Harry found their extensive history endlessly fascinating. He studied their history against the books of men, finding the differences in the tales and questioning Glorfindel, who had even been present for some of the history. As his knowledge grew, so did his respect and appreciation for Middle-earth and the realms grew. Elrond had told him tales of his life and the downfall of man. He had told Harry stories of Gandalf and his feats which Harry had enjoyed, since Gandalf rarely boasted about his power. It grew Harry's respect for his mentor. He would sometimes sit with Bilbo Baggins too, the uncle of his friend Frodo, and they would exchange tales of adventures. After his study in the library in the main building, Harry would always find Elrohir and Elladan awaiting him at the entrance. The twins reminded him of a pair of redheads back home with their mannerisms and cheeky side. Harry soon found out they were considered to be the same age to him, essentially, even though by then they were over 100 years old. Harry had scoffed at that. He himself had grown not just with knowledge and speech but in general as well. He had filled out a bit and hit another slight growth spurt which added another inch or so to his height. He was still slight and lean, but he kept up training with the twins to keep him in shape. His hair was longer too, which Arwen loved, as she would put braids into his shoulder-length hair, adorning it with beads and trinkets. The twins had teased him immensely for that. He had also kept his magic under wraps as per Gandalf's instruction. It was soon shattered though with some accidental magic. Elrohir had been a right pest that whole afternoon and well into the evening, poking Harry and teasing. Come now, Gweinig, don't pull such a face. It is too ugly for your pretty face, Elrohir said from Harry's on their bench seat in the dining hall. It was dinner and Harry was grumpy and tired from the day. He had thoroughly had his butt kicked by the twins at sparring and his archery had been abysmal. He was pretty sure he wasn't going to get it right at all, not matter how hard he practiced. Then Arnie's had been pecking his face when he had tried to take a nap in the afternoon. When he had shooed the bird away, the pecking just got more ferocious. He was being a grump, he knew, but he was human after all, and unlike all the beautiful, graceful creatures around him, he was allowed to have bad days. Harry batted away Elrohir's hand that poked at his cheek, settling on pulling apart and eating his bread roll. Gweinig, Elrohir said with a whine. You know I hate that name, Harry said with a glare, which was only responded to with a wide grin. Harry rolled his eyes. Ella, tell your brother he's being a right pain in my backside. Brother, stop annoying him, Eladan said as he sat on the other side of Harry. Having finished eating, he rested his chin in his hand, his elbow settling on the table. But I like seeing our little Gweinig all flustered, Elrohir said again, brushing hair away from Harry's neck as he poked at the ear there.
Amin delot halille, Harry growled.
You don't hate me, Elrohir replied sweetly, continuing with his petting and poking. Stop it, Harry growled out under his breath. Can you not leave me alone to eat my food in peace? Elrohir chuckled. Me? Leave you alone? Never. Just great, Harry muttered to himself in his native tongue, trying to ignore all the words and petting and poking coming from the twin next to him. Then the poking started at the scar above his eye, the finger tracing the lightning bolt scar, saying that nickname over and over to get his attention. Your scar is so strange, strange, freak, 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 will you just stop? Harry whipped around to glare at the elf, the glass goblet in his hand shattering and the candles that lit the hall blew out all at once. What happened? Elrond said from his head at the table. Luckily, Harry and the twins were seated away from the elders and the raised platform they sat on. Gandalf stood from the table and with a tap of his staff on the ground, the candles were relit. He excused himself and walked down to Harry. Harry, take a deep breath, Gandalf said softly, trying to unfurl Harry's clenched fist. Harry did as he was told and let his hand go slack for Gandalf to inspect. Elrohir and Eladan were shocked, but soon snapped out of it at the sight of Harry's torn-up hand, the shards of glass cutting deep into his palm and pads of his fingers. Eladan used a clean cloth napkin to wrap around the hand, being gentle as to not push the glass any further into his skin. Elrohir was frozen where he sat, unable to will his body into moving. Gandalf helped Harry stand, who was still silent, leading him from the hall to the House of Healing. The twins watched them go. Elrohir's face was one of pain as he made to try and follow, but Elladan's hand on his shoulder made him stop. I believe that our guest has been injured, Elrond said calmly as he stood, his robes sweeping out as he walked out the grand doors, but not before sending his son a look that said they would be talking later. Arwen glared at them and shook her head from her place. Glorfindel sighed and stood, addressing the elves still within the hall. What you all witnessed will be kept to within these halls. Clear? The elves remained silent but all nodded. In the Hall of Healing, Elrond had tended to Harry's hand quietly and gently, taking time to pull all the shards of glass out. Gandalf, did you not trust us to keep Harry and his magic secret? Elrond asked the said man who was leaning on his staff. I feared that Saruman being known to come by unannounced could cause issues. Harry was found in Gondor by Denther's boys, washed ashore, Gandalf began. He was brought here by the Vala, as another Maya, but none of us were alerted to this, let alone Saruman the White. I believe that this was for a purpose. I am sure you know of my suspicions. Yes, I have seen glimpses of the fall of Saruman the White, but it will still not be for many years, Elrond replied. I had instructed Harry to keep his magic hidden, to keep him safe, Gandalf said softly, looking at Harry who was still quiet. He could hear the thoughts running through the young man's head and he knew why he had ended up being so affected by his scar being touched. I agree with your concern. Rivendell will hold this secret within her walls, Elrond said as he pulled the last shard out, slathering on a salve across the free bleeding cuts. Harry didn't even wince. His thoughts were miles away. While he had been in this world, he had kept his scars to himself. Only Gandalf knew of them, and the Gondorian males had the tact not to ask. The hobbits had asked, but Harry said it was a long story for another time. It was a dark reminder of his past. While he was proud of the mark as a show of the love his mother had for him, It was another thing for people touching it and making comments. He'd had enough of that in Hogwarts. He didn't mean to snap like that at Elrohir. He knew his friend was purposefully trying to annoy him. It wasn't a malicious act intending to hurt him. It was more due to his already terrible mood. If it were any other day, he wouldn't have minded. Lord Elrond? Harry said, finally, startling the elf and wizard in the room. Yes, Harry? Elrond said as he wrapped a bandage around the hand. Please apologize to Elrohir and Elladan for my actions earlier, and also to the others. I didn't mean it. It was not your fault, Harry. I will be having a stern talk with my sons about their behaviors. I assure you, I do not hold you to blame for your reaction. It still does not excuse their actions, Elrond stated as he finished dressing the hand. Go rest now. Harry nodded and left for his room. Once he changed out of his day clothes into his night ones, gingerly using his injured hand. He was asleep as soon as his head hit the pillows. The next morning Harry had been awoken by the twins sitting on his bed. Elrohir looking worse for wear as his eyes were puffy and tinged red. I apologize for my actions, Harry. I did not know you would be so hurt by it and cause yourself pain, Elrohir said, his shoulders slumped and his hair hanging around his face. Harry wiped the sleep from his eyes. It was far too early to be having this conversation, but seeing the state of the elf he knew that he hadn't slept. Elladan looked no better, disheveled and his face sad. Harry felt his heart quench at the thought of the pain he had caused the elves, who usually were such resilient and happy men. Don't you apologize, Elladan said firmly. This was Elrohir's mistake and he should be held to it. Elrohir nodded at his brother's words. Well, I forgive you, Elrohir, Harry said with a smile. Elrohir nodded, his head still bowed in shame. Harry couldn't comprehend why they felt so deeply about this. It was only a small incident, yet it was almost as if he had died. Come here, Ro, Harry said as he opened up his arms, smiling in encouragement. Elrohir moved over, embracing Harry tenderly and softly. Harry returned the hug, holding the larger male in his arms, his head resting against the elf's shoulder. Harry had never been a big hugger, as he found it always a bit awkward. However, his time spent with the hobbits had him inundated with constant hugs. He had learnt the comfort they can offer. It's all right now. I'm fine, Harry said softly to the elf, smiling over the dark head resting against him to Elladan. Harry held out a hand, knowing the quiet elf would have been feeling just as guilty for the incident. I promise one day I'll tell you everything, Harry said to them both. His eyes caught Gandalf, who was in the doorway, smiling. Harry smiled back. Hope you enjoy the chapter. Year 3008. Harry lay out in the gardens by the top of the waterfall, his eyes closed and his hands tucked beneath his head. It was the perfect day. Barely any clouds and a soft breeze was blowing which ruffled his hair against his ears. Harry blinked as the sun on his face was suddenly gone. He saw Arwen bent over above him, a smile on her face. Can I join you? Arwen asked gently. Harry smiled and pat the spot next to himself. Of course. Arwen lay down next to him, closing her eyes too as Harry went back to his previous position, a smile on his face. They lay in silence for a while. Are you happy, Harry? Arwen asked, breaking the silence. Harry turned his head to look at her, confusion on his face. Arwen looked at him and elaborated further. I overheard my brothers speaking of you last night, of what you told them, how you came to be here, was all Harry could manage. I am not asking you to tell me. Do not worry, Arwen said softly, reaching to touch Harry's wrist gently. I just wish you to be happy. I want you to always smile and to feel that this place is where you do not have to hide anything about yourself. Harry rolled to his stomach to look at his friend, his eyes searching hers. He saw nothing but the care she had always shown him. I don't know what I want anymore. I know that my destiny has brought me here, but even in my old world destiny was controlling me. I want to be free, yet I want to be bound to the fates to help. It's not in my nature to run away or to deny help when it's asked, Harry said softly, laying his head into his palm as his elbows propped up his head. Arwen rested her hand against his arm but did not respond. Harry took a deep breath and continued. I am scared that I will never be able to go home and also never find a place here that I will truly feel at peace with. You will always have a home here, Arwen said softly, although her eyes seemed to be far away. One day soon you will find one to call home. Only then will you find peace and be free. Harry looked at her, puzzled. One? You all right? Oh yes, Arwen said as she seemed to come back from whatever place she was in. Harry was reminded of Luna and her strange predictions. You are a friend. I only wish for your happiness, Arwen replied. And I yours, Harry said with a smile which was returned. From what I've heard about this mysterious ranger, is anything to go by then I need not worry. Arwen lightly hit his arm but laughed joyously. Do not listen to a word my brothers tell you. They're only jealous because they try too hard for attention yet none but you pays them any. Harry laughed. That is true. Your brothers are rather keen on causing mischief than on settling down. I think father prefers that. We are still but elflings in his eyes, Arwen replied. He wants us to be carefree until the time comes when we can no longer. Harry smiled sadly. He always did forget that these beings were hundreds of years old, but they were still considered young in comparison to elves like Glorfindel who had lived many centuries of life. Hopefully not for many more years. Harry said, although in his heart he knew that was wrong. Something was coming, stirring in the distant lands. He could feel it and he was sure the elves felt it too. They lay in silence for the rest of the afternoon. Harry was sparring with Glorfindel, the blonde elf twirling twin blade swords against Harry's one and shield. Harry parried a blow with his sword, bashing against the coming sword with his shield as he ducked under another blow towards him. He was sweating and he couldn't push one annoying wet strand of hair out of his eyes as his hands were busy. He tried to wipe it away as he danced backwards to avoid another swift swing of a blade. Of course this only made Harry pissed. He knew what he did wrong as soon as he swung his sword. He overstepped and soon enough, he was pinned to the ground beneath Glorfindel who held both swords to his neck. You grew too irked and left me with the opportunity to strike. You need patience, Harry. Glorfindel chastised. Harry puffed and looked up at the elf above him with a glare, about to open his mouth to retort but it died on his lips. He realized the position they were in and his ears tinged pink. This man who looked so perfect in every sense was too close for comfort. Harry quickly looked away. Glorfindel looked confused at that. It was the whistles from the other side of the sparring ring that had Harry clearing his throat, eyes looking anywhere but above him, and Glorfindel merely smiled a small, all-knowing smile as he stood, understanding suddenly. Don't let us interrupt you too, Elrohir said with a snicker as Eladan smiled secretively. Harry pushed himself up from the ground, unwinding his hand from his shield. It's not like that. I was teaching Harry evasive moves for battle, Glorfindel said as he brushed down his robes, straightening his collar. Something that the two of you must practice as well if your recent training is any indication. The twins looked down at that. It was now Harry's turn to smirk. Glorfindel nodded. I will see you the same time tomorrow for training. Harry glared at Elrohir who wiggled his brows. You seem to like that very much, little Gweinig. Harry pushed the elf back who only laughed as he easily righted himself. Harry huffed at his failed attempt. Stupid elves and their stupid skills at being smooth. It was just training, Harry replied, picking up his sword and shield to put away. Doesn't mean you can't enjoy it, Eladan said, grinning when Harry shot him a withering look. The both of you are annoying, Harry said. If you're not careful I'll spell you both pink. Pink is rather my color, don't you think? Ella? Elrohir said with a flourish of his hands, pretending to dance. Why, I believe it is very much my color as well, Eladan responded with his own twirl. Harry couldn't help but laugh at their antics. Come now, let us go cause some mischief for our dear father, Elrohir said as he slid his arm over Harry's shoulders, pulling him to his side as Eladan threw his arm around Harry's other side. Hi all. Hope you enjoy a new chapter. I have been away on holidays with family, enjoying all the little moments with them. I hope everyone has had a lovely Christmas and New Year's. Year 3009. Lift your arms higher. Good. Now pull back. Steady, steady, Estel said gently from behind Harry, the young Astari pulling the arrow back and holding it within his fingers. Now breathe out and release, Estel instructed, and Harry did as he was told. The sound of clapping brought Harry out of his little moment of happiness. Long time no see, old man, Harry said as he wiped the sweat from his brow. I've missed you too, Harry. Gandalf responded with a smile as he approached, staff in hand. Aragorn, it is good to see you looking so well. His travels as a ranger, but whenever he stopped in Harry would spend some time with him. Harry, come and let us walk, Gandalf said gently. Harry nodded and went to put his bow away, Aragorn waving him away with the promise to collect the fallen arrows. Harry and Gandalf walked through the halls of Rivendell. It was late afternoon and the skies were pink from their position up across the valley. I have had the most terrible feeling lately, Gandalf started, disturbing the silence between the two wizards. Something has been stirring in Mordor. There has been sightings of creatures across the waters from Osgiliath again. Harry was silent. He knew what this meant. He had been having the most vivid dreams over the past few years he'd been here in this new world. I fear for the sanity of Denethor, and in turn, his sons, Gandalf said softly, stopping as they came to a railing overlooking one of the larger waterfalls. Harry leant up against the stone wall, looking down at the drop. I have been seeing the lights growing brighter, Harry said softly. The forges have been lit and there is a darkness that is growing deep beneath the earth. You are seeing it too? Good, Gandalf said, to which Harry raised a brow in response. I hardly call those visions of that terrible place good, Harry said dryly. Gandalf shook his head. It means that you were brought here as one of us, for a purpose, although I do not know why still. If you are having these visions, it will help. Should we be alerting Boromir and Faramir to this? Harry asked. I do believe they would try to act, but it's another thing to try and convince that stubborn man of a father they have, Gandalf said, pulling out his pipe as he let Harry use a finger to light it, the end of his digit holding a small flame. Harry had slowly been working on his magic being channeled through his hands just like Gandalf could. It was a handy trick for battle. We need to be careful with our actions from now on. The two were silent for a while, Harry watching as Gandalf blew smoke dragons that would twirl and fight one another before dispersing. It brought a smile to Harry's lips when one of the dragons looked eerily like the Hungarian horntail from his 4th year. When will we leave? Harry asked softly. He'd be sad to leave this beautiful place, and even more so, the inhabitants who had welcomed him so warmly. In 2 days I will need to advise Elrond and we must pack, Gandalf said with a sigh. He could see the sadness on his companion's face. Do not worry, Harry. You will return here one day again. I hope so, Harry replied, pausing for a moment before continuing. I feel like the twins will be crying for weeks once we are gone. Gandalf chuckled and rested a hand against Harry's shoulder. You can always write to them. Very true, Harry said with a smile. He had been training Arnis to carry messages for him. Gandalf had told him how Saruman used ravens, so it would just take training and a little bit of magic to get Arnis to deliver the letters. At first Arnis had been stubborn and would mostly tear up the parchment, but after quite a few treats and the promise of a new stand for him to sleep on, he'd slowly learnt to fly with a small satchel that was secure to his back. If he were flying, one wouldn't be able to see the black leather straps of the satchel that blended in with the dark feathers of his chest. Harry had been immensely proud and Arnis had puffed up under all the praise. Harry and Gandalf stayed there till the sun set. The departure from Rivendell had indeed been filled with tears. Arwen was openly shedding tears and hugging Harry farewell. Harry had to think she still looked beautiful even in her sadness. The twins looked pained as Harry hugged them both goodbye. They had gifted Harry with a beautiful elven sword that the two had commissioned their blacksmith to make for him. It was the perfect length and weight, with intricate vines twirling up the handle and hilt. Set in the blade itself was the phrase in Quenya, Endorena Utulian. Harry laughed outright at that. Indeed, my dear Elrohir and Elladan, Harry said with a smile as he held the blade, pulled from its sheath as he had read the transcription. To Middle-earth I have come. We will miss you, Elladan said softly. And I will you, Harry said as he looked around at the small group of elves. All of you. I cannot express how much your hospitality of opening your home to me means. It has truly been incredible. I have learnt so much from you all. You are always welcome here, Harry, Elrond said with a gently smile. You have a home here if you ever need shelter. If you make your way back to Hobbiton, let Frodo know I am well, Bilbo said from next to Glorfindel, leaning against his walking stick. I promised to send Arnie's with letters, Harry said with one last hug to Arwen, who was wiping her tears. Be safe on your journey, Elrond said with a small blessing in Elvish for safe travels. With that, they headed off on their horses, Harry looking back over his shoulder once more to wave as they crossed the bridge, leaving Rivendell. Harry, Gandalf called as he swung his staff at a group of thieves who had tried to invade their camp. Harry was using his sword to parry against a thief who held 2 daggers. Harry was not as strong as the burly man, but he was quicker and tactical. A sidestep here, a thrust forward there, parry that blow. Harry remembered all the training the twins had ingrained in him. The 2 men circled one another, Harry's watchful eye making sure to keep track of each step his opponent took. They both ran forward, sword meeting dagger in a clash of metal, screeching and whirling as the blades spun and hit one another. Soon enough the man was unconscious on the ground, and Harry was faced with another thief who had realized that their companion was in trouble. Harry gestured with his hand to the man, a smirk curling across his lips. Come, you filthy thief. The man let out a roar and a line of expletives until he suddenly staggered, took a few steps forward and fell to the ground unconscious. Harry glared at Gandalf, who stood behind the man, his staff raised like a club. I could have dealt with him, you know, Harry said as he checked the few cuts he had on his arms and leg from the daggers. It is best that we quickly leave, we do not want to draw attention to ourselves, Gandalf said as he began to pack their bags. Lucky the horses didn't run with all the noise, Harry added. They would not run, they know battle noises, Gandalf replied. That's something at least, Harry said with a snort. Another chapter for all those lovely people who reviewed, faved and followed. Year 3010. Gandalf and Harry finally arrived at the gates of Minas Tirith. It had taken them many months of travel from Rivendell. They had stopped at a few towns here and there to allow for the horses to rest and for them to replenish their supplies. They luckily had better weather this time around. They also had to make a detour around Isengard, heading through the remains of Dol Guldur, which had extended their trip by many weeks. The land was dead and dry, the trees blackened, and the soil was void of all plants. Not even weeds would grow. Gandalf, this place, Harry had said as they approached, his hand clutching at his head as he swayed in the saddle. He then fell, his eyes closing as he slipped into unconsciousness. When he had awoken, Gandalf had handed him a gourd of water. This place feels so dirty, Harry said after he had some sips of water. Yes, it is a place where many atrocities occurred. This is Dol Guldur, Gandalf said as he helped Harry sit up. They were huddled in a patch of dead trees, the famed mountain in the distance where the stone ruins stood. The skies above them were dark with clouds. The place of the First War? Harry asked, remembering the name from Elrond's stories. Yes. Sauron used this place as his fortress, and his magic corrupted even the earth. This area is cursed, but there is so much magic here that Saruman will not sense us passing through here. Harry shivered at the mention of the magic. He could feel the darkness around him, whispering nothing but death and decay if it were to be used. I feel so filthy. The magic here is rubbing up against me. I can feel it, Harry said as he rubbed at his arms through his coat. He felt like he needed a good bath. Yes, you are young and more susceptible to it, I'm sure. It is waiting for anyone worthy to use it, enticing travelers through here. Why, as you know, there was a necromancer here not that long ago. Harry nodded. He had heard the tales from Bilbo about Gandalf having to stop the necromancer. I just want to get out of here, Harry whispered. His head was throbbing, and he felt very much violated by the darkness that was surrounding them. I'm afraid it will take us a few extra days to traverse these lands before we will be free of the dead area, Gandalf said, patting Harry's arm. Do not worry, I will help you. I have had experience with this. Magic. Harry nodded but winced at the thought of more days of this terrible place. It was probably the longest days of his life. Harry was quite sure he didn't even sleep. He was too aware of the magic around him that he didn't even dare try to engage it by casting spells. That he left up to Gandalf, who was confident he could control it. He hated to think that Sauron had spent his whole time there amongst that magic. No wonder he ended up crazy. Now, looking up at the great white city, Harry was in awe of the sheer size. A place like this put Hogwarts to shame. The white marble and stone towered up above him as they passed through the gates. The people on the streets turned to stare but did not do much else. Most people were familiar with GENDALLF, although a few shot Harry curious looks as they rode in. "I think I might go exploring," Harry said once they dropped their packs into the room they shared, 2 single beds squished into the small room. GENDALLF merely raised a knowing brow. "Make sure to stay away from the main chambers. That is where Denethor will be," GENDALLF said as he sat on his bed and pulled out his pipe. Harry just grinned. GENDALLF seemed to know where he was heading. "I promise to be careful," Harry replied as he threw off his jacket to his bed. He'd stand out too much in it. He rolled up the sleeves of his white tunic. "Look, no weapons or anything. I won't make trouble." GENDALLF snorted at that statement. "You will make trouble no matter where you are." Harry tied his hair back at his nape, knowing he looked a bit different from before, more like a normal Gondorian boy out for a walk. "You are such a grump." Harry poked his tongue out and left, closing the door behind him as he did. He navigated his way through the streets, knowing his destination was up. Following the winding streets, he'd stop every so often to look out at the view. The higher he got, the more he could see the darkness on the horizon, clouds permanently hanging over the mountain there. Mount Doom, Harry thought to himself. He knew it would take a while to reach the top, but on foot it really was a large walk. Luckily he had taken his jacket off. Carrying that thing all the way to the top of Minas Tirith would have been tiresome. He was able to pass by the guards unseen, knowing he just looked like some servant, no doubt, if he were to be caught. But Harry was confident in his skills to be unseen. This was, after all, a surprise visit. With one thought and a bit of magic, Harry was able to find the one he was looking for. He could see the firelight rippling against the walls as he neared the entrance mouth. It seemed to be a training room, with, luckily, the only person in there being the one he was looking for. He stood for a moment watching the shirtless man spar against a sack that was tied to a chain hanging from the ceiling, very reminiscent to a boxing bag. The muscles of his back rippled in the firelight, each strike on the bag accented with a small huff of exertion. Harry rather enjoyed watching this. Creeping forward, silently, Harry was able to catch the man unaware as he threw his arms up to cover the man's eyes. Harry soon found himself flipped over a shoulder and pinned to the stone floor. One hand was still over the eyes, even as Harry felt a hand pressing against his own throat. "Who are you?" Harry slowly spread his fingers to let the man see him.
Surprise?
Harry said with a breathless laugh and a smirk as the fingers around his neck immediately lessened. "Harry," Boromir stated, his eyes wide in surprise. "The one and only," Harry said with a grin as Boromir sat up from his position hovering over his body. Harry ignored the small voice in his head that tried to protest the loss of heat. "Wow," Boromir said as he ran a hand over his beard and hair, pushing the sweat-drenched locks back. "Miss me?" Harry said as he watched Boromir closely. Up close he noticed a few things. Harry had to keep his eyes on the man's face and not to the dark hair that littered the broad chest, the trail of hair that sunk lower and lower. He kept his eyes to Boromir's face. The man's hair was obviously longer. His beard was fuller but still trimmed to the same length as it was all those years ago. He didn't look much different other than the lines on his face were a little more pronounced, especially the frown lines between his brows. On that thought, Harry poked the said lines. "You've been stressing, it seems, old man." Boromir rolled his eyes as battered Harry's hand away. "Well, I won't say I missed you now, will I? I know you did." Harry grinned and Boromir gave a small smile in return. "Only a little," Boromir said as he sat back on the stone floor, crossing his legs as Harry did the same. "Now, why are you even here, and how on Middle-earth did you get in here?" "Answer to your first question will have to wait till we get Faramir and see GENDALLF and the second magic," Harry said with a shrug. It was pretty self-explanatory. Boromir nodded, sensing already that the answer to the first question he wasn't going to like too much. In the comfortable silence that followed, Boromir looked at Harry closely. It had been 4 years since he had last seen him, but he barely looked a day older. His hair was longer and he seemed to have filled out a bit more, but his face hadn't changed, no marks or lines or showing of age. Boromir tried to stop the thoughts which were running through his head as he looked at the younger man before him. Harry quirked a brow as he noticed Boromir observing him. You've grown, but your face remains the same despite the years since I had last laid eyes on you, Boromir said softly. Harry smiled gently. Gandalf had told me that I will not age physically anymore, that it will be very slow, Harry replied, recalling the startling conversation he had with the elder wizard. It was a strange thought to know he would not show his true age physically, although mentally he would grow as he accumulated knowledge and experience. Boromir's brow furrowed at that, causing Harry to poke the thin lines that formed. This only made Boromir frown further, which made Harry chuckle. You'll be a wrinkly old man before you know it if you keep frowning like that, Harry said as Boromir snorted. Can still land you on your backside, if you've forgotten what just transpired moments ago, Boromir said in retort. What if I just feigned weakness to let you win? Keep up appearances that the great Boromir was still the fabled warrior I had heard so many tales of, Harry replied with a wide grin. Boromir rolled his eyes but stood, offering his hand to Harry. We will need a rematch then. I will be interested to see your skills after all these years. Harry let Boromir pull him to his feet. Come, Boromir instructed as he began to walk to an entrance on the opposite side to where Harry had first come. We shall find Faramir and we shall have this conversation. Harry followed Boromir, once again admiring the way the firelight danced along the man's shoulders and down his back. Boromir had stopped by his chambers briefly to change and to get a tunic to wear. He wiped himself off with a wet cloth to get rid of some of the stench of sweat. He was keenly aware of the eyes that followed his movements and he smirked to himself. Once done, Boromir led the way to Faramir's quarters. No one comes here unless it is morning to clean. Otherwise we are left alone, Boromir said softly to Harry, who hummed in response and fell in step with Boromir. Boromir stopped as they came to a large oak door set in the stone wall. He knocked and waited to hear the muffled response to come in. He opened the door and stepped in, aware that Harry was hiding easily behind his larger build. Brother, Faramir said as he turned in his chair from his desk. Papers were piled high and books were all over the place. To what do I owe the pleasure? At this moment Harry leant around Boromir with a wide grin. Miss me, little brother? Harry said, using the name that Boromir usually reserved for more affectionate moments. Boromir had to snort at that to himself, knowing full well Harry was doing it to make a jab at him. Faramir blinked once, then twice, before he was up and throwing himself at the wizard. Harry, what in Middle-earth are you doing here in Gondor? Oh, you've grown a bit too. I'm so glad to see you healthy, but it's such a surprise you're here. Why are you here? How did you get in? Did Boromir sneak you in? Faramir barely paused for breath as he spoke to the amusement of the other two. Slow down, breathe, Harry said as he hugged the younger brother back. While Harry had grown, he's still a few inches off Faramir's height. Damn those Gondorian genes and their freakish tallness. Actually, the elves had been this height too. Maybe it was something in the water. Harry let his thoughts wander as he let Faramir look him over as the Gondorian male was chatting. Boromir just watched with a curl to the ends of his lips. It was like the near 4 years hadn't even passed since they lived together in that ramshackle farmhouse. Harry snuck into the armory where I was training alone. Thankfully, Boromir said in response to his brother's questions. He surprised me too. He is here with Gandalf and we have come to get you. Faramir nodded. All right, let me just grab my book. I have a few questions for Gandalf about the use of the plant. Faramir began rummaging through a drawer on his desk. Harry sat back on the bed, feeling the plush material beneath his hands. It felt rich and warm, and he proceeded to lean back as he waited for Faramir to gather the things he needed from the adjacent room through a side door. You guys sure live in luxury here, Harry said with a sigh. What I wouldn't give to sleep in a bed like this again. Months of small scratchy in beds make this feel like heaven. Boromir chuckled. My bed is yours if you wish. Harry turned to look at Boromir, who was still standing by the door. He quirked a brow. Did he just say what he thought? Faramir came back into the room, disturbing the small silence. He stopped and raised a brow as he felt the tension. What did I miss? Nothing, Faramir. Come, we'll sneak out before Father suspects something is amiss, Boromir said with a smirk. Eyes flashing to Harry was still silent, eyes wide in surprise. Harry seemed to shake himself from the small moment. Had that been what he thought it was? He was usually pretty oblivious in the relationship department. Harry was never one to be able to pick up on subtle hints, but by the smirk that played over Boromir's lips, Harry was pretty sure he knew that his thoughts were correct. "Come on, Harry," Faramir said from the doorway, noticing his friend was not following. Harry quickly got up and brushed down the wrinkles in his shirt. He avoided meeting those steely gray eyes that were so similar to another pair that had been watching him just moments earlier. Harry had to fight hard against the shiver that tried to rack through his body at the thought of what could be. 2 wizards and 2 men sat in the room of the inn. Gandalf and Harry sitting on one bed facing the 2 men sitting on the other. Harry had hastily chosen to sit next to Gandalf, still trying to wipe the thoughts from what happened earlier from his mind. Gandalf raised a gray brow as he saw his friend avoid his gaze, but hearing his thoughts only made Gandalf chuckle around his pipe as Harry shot him a withering look. "Boromir, Faramir, sons of Denethor, welcome to our small although cozy room," Gandalf said in greeting to the men. "I know it is unsavory to be within here, but I cannot have anyone overhearing our conversation and get word back to your father about our presence within the city." Harry stayed silent as Gandalf spoke, picking at a loose thread on the bed cover he sat on. Tucking his legs beneath him, he listened as Gandalf began to explain their reason for being here. "I am sure you have heard of the presence of more monsters, as all those years ago along the river bordering Osgiliath." Gandalf started, receiving nods. The brothers still were patrolling those areas. "The fires have been lit within Mordor. They are already gathering and forging blades. I believe that the time is coming," Gandalf said with a puff on his pipe. "Your father, no matter how many times I have spoken with him, still refuses to acknowledge any danger, even when it is visible across the plains itself. You have seen the brightness growing there, so I know you can believe me." Gandalf patted Harry's knee, stating, "Harry has been having visions of the movement within the bowels of Mordor. The creatures whisper of their master. It is crucial that we begin to be ready." Boromir frowned deeply and Faramir looked shocked. "You don't mean to say that Sauron will return?" Faramir asked. "Cannot say. But something is coming," Gandalf replied. "I know you both cannot do much under your father's rule, but you can instruct your soldiers. As head and strategist of the Gondorian soldiers and cavalry, you will be able to train them harder and to organize more watches. The outer villages will need your protection. They will look to Gondor for help." Boromir nodded. He could do that. His eyes flicked to Harry, who was watching him. Once their eyes connected, they held for a few moments before Harry smiled softly. "For how long?" Faramir asked. "For as long as it takes to make sure you and the soldiers are ready. I have been practicing my magic enough to set up wards and sensors along the borders closer to Mordor that will alert me if beings cross it or come too close," Harry explained as he looked between the 2 men. "I have been training for this with Gandalf. I want to make sure that you 2 are protected along with your people." Harry dropped his gaze as he felt all eyes on him. The only person who would do such a thing was already sitting beside him. Being the son of the stewards, the brothers never had friends that would treat them as equals. They all knew them by name and face, and even their soldiers treated them with respect as their superiors. Boromir merely nodded, although his eyes betrayed his emotions. Not that Harry noticed. He was avoiding the steely gaze, but Gandalf didn't miss the look that was sent to his younger companion. "I will help Harry gather supplies over the next few days, and we will travel to the farmhouse. We wish to let you know now, as it will be easier for you to disguise a trip from the city as a patrol rather than having Harry travel consistently here," Gandalf explained. Boromir stood when Faramir did, following his younger brother out the room. He didn't miss the way Harry didn't watch them leave. Pausing by the door, Boromir looked back at Harry, who was still looking at his hands. "Harry?" he asked, making said man raise his gaze to look at him. "I am glad you have returned." Harry smiled softly. "Me too. Safe trip back." Boromir nodded before closing the door behind him. Gandalf chuckled. "I must say I did not expect such a turn of events," Gandalf said as Harry swatted his arm. "Don't know what you're speaking of," Harry muttered as he got back up to his own bed, laying down as he felt the warmth of the bodies previously sitting on it. He is a good man, but he has his faults as well, Gandalf said with a smile. Faults that have given him trouble before. If one were to accept those and see past them to the man, Harry huffed as he dropped his back on his pillow. Stop trying to play matchmaker, old man. You'll find that my stubbornness to do as told will push me in the opposite direction. Gandalf laughed. Now that I know is a lie. I do not need eyes to see what was occurring. Could you not feel the magic in the air? Merlin, you're such a nosy old codger. Harry rolled over and buried his pink face into his sheets. Can we just drop this? Especially if we are going to be around them for the foreseeable future. Gandalf shook his head with fondness but left it alone. For now. Faramir followed his brother back to their chambers. The walk through the streets had been quiet, as Boromir seemed deep in thought. What is wrong? Faramir asked as they came to stop outside Boromir's chambers. What Gandalf and Harry have told us. Our people are at risk, Boromir said. If we are to protect them, we must be acting now. I know they said they will put up protections for us between Mordor and our lands, but we must do more. I know. I was thinking of seeing if any of the soldiers would want to learn more about healing or at least how to do wound dressings and making the salves. It may go a long way should we ever have a need for battle. Faramir said softly, leaning against the wall. We will protect Gondor and its people, Boromir said firmly. That we will. Faramir echoed back his sentiment, clapping Boromir on the shoulder before he left for his own rooms. Boromir fell asleep that night to thoughts of monsters and blood and a green-eyed wizard standing beside him on a battlefield. Harry had spent the morning going to the markets to get the items they would need. That consisted of salt, dried food for storage, and a few bags of fresh produced potatoes, onions, and the strange fruit he had come to love in Rivendell. It was when he was just finishing ladening up their saddlebags that Harry noticed the small sign above a battered wooden door, hidden partially by a store selling dried meats. Upon closer inspection, it was a bookstore. Harry checked the amount of coins he had left from Gandalf and smiled to himself, knowing he'd be able to snag a few new books. Entering the dimly lit shop, Harry began to scour the shelves. Can I help you, sir? A small voice asked as a child, dressed in simple pants and white tunic, appeared at his side. I was just browsing, Harry said with a smile, seeing the young boy nod. Please, hold on a moment. I think I know just what you're looking for. The boy replied as he slipped away, even after Harry called out after him. But I didn't even ask for anything. The boy soon appeared with a thick tome of a book, its hardcover decorated in thick chains that jangled whenever the book was moved. I think this will be what you have been searching for, the boy said with a slight smile, blue eyes twinkling as he looked up to a stunned Harry. But, I mean, what is this? Harry asked as he held the book out before him. You will find the answers you are seeking. Trust me, the boy said as he pushed Harry back towards the door. Go now. We wish you luck, Harry Potter. Harry didn't even have time to protest as he was pushed out the door with a strength a child of that age should not have had. For a moment, Harry stood as the sounds of the street came rushing back around him. By the time he gathered his wits and turned back to go into the shop, the door had disappeared and all that Harry faced was a blank wooden wall. Harry shook his head, not believing what he was seeing. Yes, back home there had been disappearing doors and rooms, but this was the first time he encountered it here. Looking down at the book in his hands, Harry turned back to put it away in his bag, sending Gandalf a mental message about what had just happened. Harry knew that once they made it to the farmhouse, he'd be trying to read that book. It hadn't taken long to clean up the farmhouse. A small amount of magic to spell away the dust and transfiguring a few more items of furniture from some logs of wood. Gandalf had chuckled at the wooden benches made to sit around the fireplace. Harry just placed some cushions he had brought from Minas Tirith. What? It seems the life of comfort with the elves has not escaped you just yet, Gandalf remarked even as he placed books on the shelves. I like sitting by the fire, Harry muttered as he moved to make the beds, having placed another bed against the opposite wall for himself. He had placed the mysterious book out on the bench to look at later. He and Gandalf both could not sense anything about the book being different, and yet they couldn't open it. One thing that Gandalf was certain was that it was not there to harm Harry. Once they had cleaned and made the place livable, Harry had started on their evening meal. It was a tap on the windows that had Harry pausing and stirring the stew, moving to let Arnie's in. His bird presented his back with his pack on, to which Harry took out the small scroll. Boromir and Faramir have convinced their father that they can leave for scouting. They will be leaving in 2 months' time. Boromir has some duties to attend to first. Harry read the missive aloud to Gandalf, who scratched at his beard. We will need to start on warding then. Tomorrow morning, Gandalf said, thinking deeply. Then we will need to spread it along to the western borders. I should speak with the Odin of Rohan if he is to be at risk with Saruman. Will the White Wizard not be suspicious? Harry asked as he placed some food and water out for Arnie's with his stand and went back to checking on dinner. I mean, if you just show up to Rohan where you haven't been for many years, perhaps we can send our friends from Gondor then, as a show of the old ways of their truce, Gandalf thought to himself out loud. Can always ask Faramir, he has always been better with his words, Harry replied. He tasted the stew before ladling it into 2 wooden bowls, moving to the table and placing one before Gandalf. Gandalf just hummed his agreement, but began to eat. Harry smiled as Arnie's flew over to perch on the back of one of the empty chairs, watching with intelligent eyes. Harry tore a bit of his bread to feed to Arnie's. After eating, Harry took the bowls outside to rinse with water from the well. He tended to the horses and gave them some hay. This was the life he was to lead for the foreseeable future. This simple life had first been introduced to all those years ago. For years he had been in this realm. For years since he washed ashore nearby. His thoughts drifted to his family at home, to the friends he had left behind who had no clue as to where he was. He missed them terribly, but he had no way home. Even after all these years, there was never any stories of coming from another place other than the Vala and the elves traveling to the Grey Havens. Harry was the first known traveler from another realm. Harry and Gandalf stayed up talking that night about the plans needed to protect the people. They had then turned their attention to the book, but they still could not open it with either magic or strength. Gandalf had stroked his beard and said that he would have to make contact with others who would have a better idea. It was well into the late hours when the candles had burned low that the two finally let themselves go to bed. Harry and Gandalf had begun to ward the areas around them, starting from the far end away from the farmhouse, using the river as their centered guide. Binding wards to the physical nature of the bank. A break in the land and water would help hold the magic. It was slow work, making sure the wards were strong and that they would hold against any that dared cross with any ill intent. Not that many travelers would be crossing from the lands of Mordor to Gondor anyway, but to set it up this way meant travelers could cross. By the end of the 3rd week of warding just a stretch of the river, Harry was exhausted. It was late afternoon and he was all but dead on his feet. Gandalf was in much better shape. His years of performing magic had him merely drained and sore. It was even more daunting as Gandalf had advised. He would be leaving in a few days to go to Minas Tirith. Harry would be alone for the next month until Boromir and Faramir arrived. Harry knew he was going to have to watch his energy levels and to not hurt himself. Even with training for the past 4 years, Harry's grasp on the way the magic worked here was still growing. It was depending a lot on the environment and the emotions he felt when using it. He could recall the time he had lashed out at Elrohir and the time spent half catatonic in Dol Guldur. But the main emotion that Harry had trouble controlling was as always sadness. Anger he could deal with. He had countless experience with it at the Dursleys and at Hogwarts, having to learn to restrict his outbursts and his sharp words for fear of the backlash he'd receive for it. He would slip in his control, of course, like with Aunt Marge and the few instances with Ron, but overall, he thought he always had a good handle on that one emotion. Sadness. That was the flip side of that coin. Harry had always had to shield himself from that emotion. If he slipped too far into it, he would have drowned many years ago. Too many bad things kept on happening, and there didn't seem to be any end of it happening even here. There was still those days where Harry would wake from a dream so vivid and real, he would think he was home in Grimmauld. For just a moment before the haze would clear, and he'd remember the fall from the cliff. For years was not enough time. He had accepted being here and his role, but it did nothing to lessen the small part of him that still yearned for home. Those days were hard, especially since he'd be alone with his thoughts mostly as Gandalf worked elsewhere on wards. Today had been what he had estimated to be Halloween back home. Harry sat down heavily on the bench by the fire, rubbing his face with his hands. How he wished to be home to go and see the graves of his parents, of Sirius and Remus and all the others. Halloween was always a day of reflection, a day to remember, and here he was, in a world so far away from home. While Middle-earth had some festive events like Yule in the Shire and Mid-Year Day, the hobbits did love to party, and any excuse to drink and eat was always embraced. Halloween wasn't even a thought on the minds of people here. Dressing up as the dead would be seen as disrespectful, and those dressed as monsters would most likely be beaten for frightening the women and children. Harry stared into the fire, thinking. He didn't turn when he felt a hand on his shoulder as Gandalf came to sit next to him. "You know that they are watching over you, even here in this realm," Gandalf said softly. Harry felt his throat clench, his hand coming up to grasp the weathered one tightly. Gandalf squeezed his hand back gently. "I fear, Gandalf, that I'll never be able to go home again, never see my friends, see my godson. Oh gods, I'm never going to see them again." Harry choked on his tears as Gandalf came around, putting his arms around Harry and pulling him close. "I may not know much, but I know this, Harry, the Vala always have a plan. They are the originals, the all-seers. They know your pain, have seen it, and have sent you here for a reason." Harry blew out a ragged breath, trying to stop his heart from beating so fast. "You will return there one day, the Vala will see that you do." Gandalf tightened his hold, grasping the young Astari so tight, Harry's breath left him. "I just know it. I hope so. Or at least so I know that they're all well. I just want them to know I'm okay. That I'm here, that I'm about to fight in another damn war, and that I just wish they were here with me again." Harry dragged a ragged breath in. Ron, he would know how to formulate a plan of attack, and Hermione, her brains would figure out everything we would need to win. Harry whispered out as his cheeks were stained with his tears. Gandalf rubbed his back and let him speak, into the long hours of the night. Of pain, of loss, of missing the only family he had ever known, of death and of life, of his little godson he would never see grown. Gandalf listened to it all. When Harry's breathing evened out and his throat was raw from speaking for so long, did Gandalf finally break the silence. "Do not give up hope, young Harry. For times are still bright, and there is a white light ahead for you. And I do believe the branches span far and wide." Harry just looked into those wise eyes, the prophetic nature of the words making the hair on his arms stand on end. Gandalf smiled gently. "You will affect and save many by being here, and I am glad you are here with me. I would not be able to fight this alone. With Saruman slowly falling to darkness, Radagast too far gone with the animals and the blue wizards, well, let's just say they will no longer speak to any other except to themselves." Harry gripped Gandalf's arm. "I will stand by your side, and by the men of Gondor and the elves of Rivendell and by the hobbits of the Shire. My friends in this new home. I swear it." Gandalf patted the hand on his arm. "You are a good man, Harry Potter. A good man." Harry finally smiled back. Gandalf leant against his staff, Boromir and Faramir by his side as they walked the throne room of Gondor's lost kings. Gandalf felt the air stir, the darkness eating away at the light. The tree of Gondor was dying. "Are you sure you must do this?" Faramir whispered. "Yes. I must see how your father reacts to some truths." Gandalf answered as they approached the steward. The man was seated at the foot of the stairs to the throne, his face haggard and far too old for his age. Boromir snorted. "He would most likely knock father off his seat in anger, which is why I wanted him to come," Faramir replied. Boromir just smirked. He loved his father, he did. But he was a stubborn man that refused to see the truth even as it began to grow before their eyes. From the top of Minas Tirith, the glowing of Mount Doom seemed to only grow brighter with each passing moon. Harry, who they had taught to speak, to read, and to fight, the young man he had parted ways with, had matured into a smart, feisty, and strong man. Boromir liked women, there was no doubt of that. Many a Gondorian would tell you of a tale or two of bar wenches and innkeepers' daughters after a few Alash had been consumed. That was normal. He was a man not tied down by any wife or promises of marriage. What no Gondorian would ever know was that Boromir had often admired other men. He was not blind, and the men of Gondor had a few men who he could say he appreciated in looks more than fighting skills. Boromir had a few dalliances, always sworn to secrecy and kept to dark and isolated inns. Boromir was no stranger to attraction to men, so why did Harry, only 3 years younger than his own brother, make him feel like he was only now truly alive? There was a heat in his chest when he pictured the raven and that smile of his, coy and lips twisting at the corners. Gods, was there a heat like a burning fire lit? Boromir was shaken from his thoughts when they finally reached his father. Faramir quirked a brow at Boromir, who just shook his head quickly before speaking. Gandalf the Grey, I would wish you welcome, but I do not like you standing in my halls, for it has been so long since you last graced us mere mortals with your presence, mocked Denethor, who did not rise from his seat. Speak now or leave, father, Faramir admonished. Quiet, boy, Denethor snapped. Faramir closed his mouth, the muscle in his jaw twitching. Father, I ask of you to hear of what Gandalf has to say. Boromir soothed, stepping forward to get between his father and Faramir. Denethor waved a hand, leaning back in his wooden chair as if it were the throne above. I come to speak to you of the shadows lurking at your door. Denethor, you must strengthen your borders and help the outer towns. There is darkness coming, a shadow that falls upon the lands and soaks into the earth. Lies, Denethor seethed. We are safe here. Strong and mighty is Gondor. The weakness of man has always been pride, or have you forgotten the tale of the fall of even kings? Gandalf replied calmly. Boromir stepped between Gandalf and his father as the man lunged for the wizard. Father, calm yourself. You must listen to what Gandalf the Grey has to say. Boromir urged his father back to his seat. He has poisoned your mind, my son, Denethor said wearily, rubbing a hand over his beard. Gandalf turned my youngest to a useless medic, and my eldest is now under his spells too. I am not under any spell, Boromir said firmly. I have seen the creature's father, as have the other men. The people of Osgiliath talk of their scouts going missing and never to return. The children have to play in the square for their parent fear. Should they leave the walls, they too will be taken. There is a darkness coming. Faramir repeated what Gandalf said. Father, we must help the people of Gondor. The men are ready to protect Gondor and its people, Boromir added. We only need your word, and we will be able to proceed with more scouting. More weapons to be forged, to strengthen our defenses. Denethor looked to his eldest. His pride, his joy. You believe this, Boromir? Boromir stood tall. Yes, father, I do. I would do anything to protect Gondor and those who live within these lands. Then so be it, Denethor said, turning away. Leave Gandalf and preach your words to others, but not within my walls. And do not come back. If you do, you will not be welcome. Gandalf nodded and swept away, knowing that Faramir and Boromir would be staying in the city for the next few months to get the soldiers ready. It was up to Harry and him to get the wards functioning, and soon. Gandalf knew he would have to go traveling soon, especially when he had a hunch of what was to come. There would be a need to see all the lands and to find information. He knew Harry would be all right on his own now. He was strong and quick on his feet. Gandalf was proud to call him a friend, and his protégé. Gandalf left Minas Tirith and mounted his steed, readying to leave the city behind for a long time. He knew Denethor would make do on his promise. Boromir stood with his brother as they watched Gandalf ride through the courtyard past the dying white tree. The ever-dried-out wood was sickly and frail, as it had been since the last of the kings. I fear father is beginning to lose himself, Faramir whispered, barely above a breath. Boromir's lips tightened and he nodded ever so slightly. Treason of such nature was not to be overheard, even by their servants, and especially not their father. We will do what we can in his place, as he no longer sees reason, Boromir replied, balling his fists at his sides. Damn this father and his ability to make things that much harder. Come, brother, we shall start on our own missives that are needing to be sent, Boromir instructed as he turned towards the inner halls of Minas Tirith, where the library was held. Shall I send word to Rohan? Faramir asked as he fell in step with his brother. I will. Boromir and Faramir walked the halls until they emerged in the libraries. Boromir began to pull out maps, laying them out on the large wooden table. We will need to begin to plan and arrange for the troops to begin scout and protect the borders. Boromir said, I will have to take some of them out to get the herbs we will need. Maybe I shall start to grow them here in the city and employ some of the younger boys and women to make the pastes. Faramir suggested. Fine plan. Boromir gave his brother a nod of approval. We will need the smiths to begin forging new armor and blades. New horses will be needed. That may be something we can arrange with Rohan as they breed only the finest beasts. Will Harry need anything more? Faramir asked, thinking about what Gandalf had told them about Harry being left at the farmhouse while he continued the warding. Likely more food and maybe some more bedding as it's beginning to cool in the eve. Boromir said. Faramir nodded and wrote it down. I will send a missive with Arnie's if he returns to ask. If he can get it to Harry before we leave, I will head down to the lower rings and the markets and buy what he needs. Harry had taken a towel and change of clothing down to the river to prepare for the evening. He felt like collapsing into bed but knew he'd regret not cleaning himself if he did. Easing himself down into the water, he sat on the bottom, the running water coming to his chest as he rubbed the grime and sweat from his arms. Harry dunked his head, feeling the cool water against his heated skin. He used his fingers to untangle his long hair, running it through the water as he felt the slick tresses come loose with sweat and oil. He all but jumped when a set of hands came to rest on his shoulders, his hand coming to press against the jaw of his intruder. He was about to utter a spell, but it died on his lips as he twisted out of the water to see a familiar smirk. I could have killed you, Harry muttered as he sat back into the water with a sigh, his muscles aching from the sudden movements. Boromir smirked and cocked his head to the side, eyeing Harry's front that he could see. I thought you heard me. You're back. Boromir nodded. Harry pushed his wet hair back from his face, looking at the man before him. Boromir was naked. That much was sure as Harry could see through the clear water. Dark hairs were collecting droplets of water and Harry's breath hitched in his throat. Harry looked away, trying to shift himself so he was hidden from those gray eyes. He turned his back and continued to wash himself, knowing that the sooner he could finish the sooner they would be around others and those eyes would not be so intense. Boromir reached out again, gently cupping Harry's shoulders, his thumbs rubbing at the muscles he could see straining. Gandalf said you had overexerted yourself, Boromir said, his voice low. Harry couldn't stop the low moan that escaped at the pleasure of having the knots worked out of his muscles. I know I am being forward, Boromir said softly, continuing even as Harry did not reply. We are both men. I know what that means, especially to people like my father. But you came back so suddenly and now I can't seem to get you out of my mind. Harry chuckled. You are being forward. I can only assume since you allow me to touch you so, that you do not mind? Boromir asked. Harry hummed low, taking a moment to think. This was all new. He breathed in to calm himself, before answering. I do not mind. Boromir did not reply but continued his massage. They both were silent, the only sounds being the trickle of flowing water that moved around them both. Boromir's hands stilled and Harry turned to look back at the man behind him. Boromir's face was set in a frown and Harry smiled softly. I have not been able to forget the way the fire danced across your skin, or how it reflected the sweat that ran down your back. Harry admitted. He had never said such thoughts aloud, even in his old world. He was hardly experienced in any sort of relationships other than the year he spent with Ginny. Even then, he had been only a child, now he was a grown man. It might have been strange to others, that for all these years Harry had not been with anyone but in that very moment. Right here, he knew this was why. It was different. It was worth the wait. Harry moved forward, placing a hand against Boromir's cheek, feeling the scruff of beard against his palm. Come, we should head back before Faramir is worried, Harry said softly. Boromir met his eyes, those gray orbs stormy. Harry blinked at the darkness he saw in those eyes. Something was there that sent a shiver through him. Boromir surged forward to capture Harry's lips in a searing kiss. It was dominating and powerful, and Harry felt the heat spread through his lips and down his chest. He was consumed by the fire in Boromir, and he surrendered himself to it. It was like nothing he had felt before. All too soon Boromir pulled away, his eyes still burning. I have always been a man that knew what he wanted, and I have never hesitated before now. I know what I want, Boromir said, his eyes still locked on Harry. I want you, all of you, not just a kiss or your skin against mine, but as a companion, as mine. Harry dropped his gaze to the water, the heat still burning in his chest, making it feel tight and tingly. No one has ever wanted me, Harry replied. A gentle hand on his face had him looking up to meet Boromir's gaze. I want only you, Boromir affirmed once more, and Harry couldn't let his eyes leave his face. He looked for any sign of hesitation. There was none. Harry nodded, biting his lip in nervousness. This was agreeing to something way over his head, of giving himself over to someone completely. Boromir smiled so gently that Harry was taken aback. He hadn't seen a smile like that before. Let us go back, Boromir said as he stood suddenly, making Harry look down as Boromir stood in all his naked glory before him. Boromir chuckled and helped Harry to his feet. He leant down and brushed a kiss along Harry's shoulder. You will grow used to seeing my true skin, as I will see yours. Harry let Boromir take Harry's hands away from covering himself and instead of looking, walked them back to shore. Harry changed into his clean clothes, noting that Boromir did not watch him. Harry bundled his dirty clothes into his arms and stood waiting for Boromir to finish putting his boots back on. Everything had changed between them. Another chapter. Hope you enjoy. Harry and Boromir had not spent much time together since that day. Boromir and Faramir had to patrol during the day as Harry continued to work on the wards. Night times were spent discussing what needed to be done and what training the soldiers would need to fight a multitude of dark creatures that could come from Mordor. While they hadn't had time to themselves to even discuss what had happened down by the river, it was the small things that Harry noticed. Like Boromir did not take his seat until Harry did at the table, or the placing of a gentle hand on his shoulder as he read at night. Harry could see Faramir's smile whenever it happened, and Harry would avert his eyes quickly. Boromir, if he noticed, never commented on it. Faramir, I will go back to Father with our scouting reports, Boromir said one morning as they sat breaking bread for the day. I will come back with some supplies. Faramir had written a list of items they would need stocked up, and Harry had gone to help Boromir saddle his horse. Setting the blanket and saddle over the beast, Harry tightened the straps and buckled it down. As he stood, he paused as hands rested on his hips. Hidden in the shadows of the stable, Boromir let Harry turn in his arms, leaning down to share a kiss, the first since their moment down by the river. The kiss turned heated as Boromir pulled Harry close. The two wrapped up in each other until air became a necessity that had them pulling away. What was that for? Harry asked with a chuckle, a silly smile on his face as the heat was once more spreading through his chest. As a reminder of my promise to you, Boromir said as his thumbs rubbed at his hips. I will also miss seeing your face for the few days I will be away. I wanted a memento. A memento of what? The kiss? Harry said with a brow raised. Boromir chuckled. That and your expression after I kissed you. I will be having time to myself after all. I want to be able to think of you. You are insatiable, Harry said with a chuckle, although he had to stop the multitude of images that Boromir's words put into his head. Boromir leant down again, this kiss more tender but still no less exciting. He pulled away and moved back to grab his pack from the floor of the stable. Harry took a few moments to remember how to breathe before moving to follow Boromir outside to say goodbye. Faramir was already there as Boromir mounted his horse, and they waved him goodbye as he left. I do not mind, you know, Faramir said as they watched Boromir as he disappeared behind the line of trees. Mind what? Harry said, confused. You and brother, Faramir said as he turned to Harry, who suddenly looked guilty. We weren't trying to hide it, I promise, Harry said. We are just taking it slow. I know. But I know brother would have tried to keep it from me in fear I share father's ideals. I do not, Faramir said, clapping a hand against Harry's shoulder. I can see how happy he is when he looks at you. You make him smile more openly, more so than any woman has. If he is to want you and you return those feelings, who am I to judge? Faramir returned the hug and pulled back. I am glad it is you to be the one Boromir has chosen, for he could not have made a better decision. Harry laughed. Don't tell me you've been in cahoots with Gandalf? No, But we did have a conversation when I began to notice what was happening. Faramir replied as they began to walk back to the farmhouse. That nosy old man. Harry muttered under his breath, but his smile betrayed his affection for the wizard. Nosy he may be, but he always had only Harry's best intentions at heart. I will talk with my brother when he returns. I want him to know he has my support. You both do, Faramir said as they sat at the table, ready to go over more battle formation strategies to teach to the soldiers. He will appreciate it, as I do. Harry replied. You're a good brother and a good man. Faramir smiled and then shrugged. Well, what else could I say? If I did not support you, Boromir would just beat me down or would steal you away, and I want neither of those things to happen. Boromir told me your father does not approve of male relationships, Harry said. Would he want to intervene to stop us? Faramir frowned. I cannot say what my father would do, as he is a man I do not know anymore. He has always favored Boromir over myself, as he was a great warrior whilst I leant more towards the art of healing and strategy. Father preferred to have sons that would make him proud, not sons that would read in their rooms or, in this case, lay with a man. That was one of his favorite insults, that the scholars and intellectuals would lay together as no woman would want them. I could not say what extremes he would go to if he found out. Harry paused, making sure Faramir understood and believed his words. As for your father, well, we will cross that bridge when we come to it. Faramir nodded, uncertain, and Harry could see the worry in his eyes. He cursed their father for putting his own son in so much doubt about his own abilities and for scaring him so he could not stand up to him. Year 3012. It had taken Harry nearly 2 years before he felt confident enough that his wards were holding, stretched along the banks of the river. He had spent some time with Faramir traveling down towards Osgiliath to begin on the wards there while Boromir was away training. They had begun the slow process to overhaul the rule of the steward by starting with the soldiers. It wasn't meant to get rid of the man. Harry had yet to even meet the steward, and the brothers, while they didn't always get along with the man, didn't want him hurt. No, they merely undermined his light-handed rule and directed the soldiers themselves, preparing them. Boromir was a man that the soldiers all looked up to, and with Faramir and Harry backing him up behind the scenes, they were able to entice a newfound vigor in the men of Gondor. Boromir didn't tell them about the threat from Mount Doom across the plains, but there was enough whispers on the streets that it made the men want to protect their families. Between the three of them, Gandalf was still traveling but corresponding via Arnis. They were slowly making progress. With this, whenever Boromir would return and Faramir would leave to do errands, Harry and Boromir's relationship slowly started to blossom. It took a lot of effort from Harry, who was not used to being with someone, let alone a man, to start their interactions. But he was trying to show more of his supposed Gryffindor courage when it came to Boromir. It started with small things, like touching Boromir as he walked past, or leaning against the Gondorian side as they sat together. Small things that Harry felt like he could manage to do without any hesitation. Then it became more, taking Boromir's hand as they walked around the field in the afternoon, or pressing a kiss to the stubbled cheek in passing. Things that became as easy as breathing, so natural that it didn't even need thought. The biggest step had been the first time Harry had taken Boromir by the hand and they had bathed together at the river. Boromir had kept silent as Harry undressed him, slowly, taking it all in. Boromir had stood still as he let Harry touch him, softly mapping out every limb and every scar. Fingers slowly traced the curve of muscles and ran over the jut of bones. Boromir's breath caught in his throat as lips had followed those hands, gliding over tan skin and coarse hair. Boromir had smiled for the rest of the day. It had been the first big step in their relationship, and Harry had taken the lead. It had been a confidence boost for Harry to have been the one who initiated that step for them. Not to say that they didn't get on each other's nerves. Their first fight had happened at the table, with Faramir having to bear witness. I am not some damsel in distress that needs to be watched at all hours, Harry yelled as he roughly pushed away from the table. Boromir's face was dark with anger. You will not be going alone to that terrible place. I forbid it. Who are you to tell me what I can and cannot do? Harry rounded back to face Boromir, his hands shaking at his sides. I am more than capable. Faramir sat at the table, quiet as he watched the two of them, his eyes flicking between them both. You are mine, and you will do as I say, Boromir growled out. I am not yours. Like some damn animal that you keep for pleasure. I am my own person, and damn it, Boromir. If you haven't gotten that idea through that thick head of yours by now, then you're not the man I thought you were. I am not one of your besotted bar wenches you can have complete control over. Do not treat me as if I cannot protect myself. Harry spat out as he whirled around and left the farmhouse, slamming the door behind him. Boromir let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding in. Faramir cleared his throat, making Boromir turn to him. Harry is right, brother. You cannot forbid him to travel alone if that's what Gandalf had asked of him. Faramir said, It is not like he will be away long, just across the river for scouting. You know what Gandalf said is true, we need to see what lays at the borders of Mordor. I will not risk him going alone, Boromir gritted out, running his hands through his hair. How can I let him go alone to that terrible place? Faramir looked at his brother closely. I have never seen you like this, brother. You truly do care for Harry, don't you? Boromir turned to Faramir. Of course I do. I would die for him. That is exactly why I do not like him having to leave to a place I cannot follow. What if something were to happen, or if he was taken to a place I could not reach? I do not think I could live with myself if he was hurt and I was not there. Faramir stood, laying a hand against Boromir's shoulder. Go tell Harry that. Tell him why you said those things. Boromir looked out the window. I do not think he will forgive me so easily, and that, brother, is where you underestimate the size of Harry's heart. Go to him, Faramir urged as he pushed him towards the door. Boromir emerged by the riverbank to see Harry sitting atop one of the rocks there, gazing out across the water. Even as he approached, Harry didn't move. Rounding the rock, Boromir knelt down on the rocky shore, so he was eye to eye with Harry. Gently, he reached out and took Harry's hands within his own, silently pleading that he would not pull away. Harry didn't. Boromir squeezed the hands held within his own gently. I am sorry for the things I said back in the farmhouse. I do not think you incapable or unable to protect yourself. I know how powerful you are, let alone with the aid of your magic. Boromir took a moment to breath. He didn't want his emotions to take control of him again and make this worse. I was afraid for myself more than you, Boromir said softly. Afraid that I would not be able to do anything to aid you if something went wrong. If I could not reach you across the border, then you would be lost to me. I could not bear to even think of something so terrible happening. Harry squeezed Boromir's hands back. I'm sorry too, I didn't mean to raise my voice like that. I was just so frustrated. You were treating me like I was weak and fragile. Boromir shook his head. Never, Harry. I know you are not in need of saving or guarding, but I just want to stand by your side through everything. Is that such a terrible thing? Harry looked at Boromir, seeing the sincerity in those gray eyes. He tugged at the hands that held him till Boromir fell forward, and he was able to rest his head against the broad shoulder. No, that is not a terrible thing at all, Harry whispered. Boromir let Harry's hands go as he wrapped his arms around his slighter frame. I would die for you, Harry. Harry wrapped his arms around Boromir's neck, burrowing himself down. He couldn't even bring himself to respond, but he felt the arms around him tighten, and he knew that Boromir understood. Those words would mean more than any whispered sentiments of love. In a world as dark as Middle-earth was becoming, to Harry, those soft words meant everything. Year 3013. It was a night with no stars when Harry jolted awake. He looked around him, hair standing on the back of his neck. His wards had just been triggered. While he did not set a sounding alarm like he usually would, he had worked one to wake him should something approach the camp he had set up. Instincts had his fingers curled around the handle of his staff and the other held his dagger. His sword lay with his pack next to him. He had taken to sleeping with both as he traversed through the borderlands of Mordor. He was currently in the mountains of Udan, north of Caer Andros. He had traveled north to avoid Minas Morgul and the Dark Tower there. Harry was trying to use the height to get a better sense of the landscape. He had seen the ring wraiths beginning to circle the lands. They knew he was here, but thankfully it seemed his spells had kept him well hidden. He had to keep moving and never stayed in one camp for long, keeping to moving through the night to ensure that he would not be found by any dark creatures. He had made a promise to Boromir after all, that he would be no longer than 3 months. On the eve of the full moon he would have to be at the farmhouse, or Boromir swore he'd be marching through the lands with Gondor's men behind him. That was something Harry didn't want to happen. A shadow loomed over a rock to his right, and Harry brought his dagger higher, crouching down low. He eyed his sword behind him. "Show yourself," Harry breathed out, his eyes scanning his surrounds. A shadow moved to his right, and Harry spun around quickly, sword raised. "Luke sees what I founds," the figure whispered out, the almost hiss to the words making Harry shudder. "What's Precious doing here?" The shadow moved closer, emerging from the darkness with long, gangling limbs, bones jutting out from the stretched skin. A wraith of a figure, skeletal and with skin so pale and sickly, pulled tight over bone and the little muscle left. The figure was far too alike the one he had left behind at King's Cross, so sad and pitiful that it died beneath the seat of a white platform, never to move on and never to be seen again. Gollum. Harry grit his teeth. He knew this creature. After all, it was one of Bilbo's favorite stories to tell, of riddles and tricks in the depths of the Goblin King's caves. "You know my name, man," Gollum said, eyes wide in the moonlight. "Yes, I know you," Harry replied, not loosening his hold on the hilt. "That is no good, no good," Gollum muttered to himself as he slunk over a rock nearby, perching himself atop it. His back was to Harry, who stood still. Gandalf had told him of the fate of Gollum, from a mysterious ring that had driven him mad. A ring, which Harry knew now rested in the bottom of a trunk in Frodo Baggins' living room. "I mean you no harm. I will be on my way," Harry said, breaking Gollum from his muttering. It was well off morning, but Harry had learnt the area well enough to move on to another area. "No, must stay with Gollum. Stay with us, Precious. You like Precious." Harry wasn't expecting it when Gollum turned and lunged at him, but his instincts reacted fast. He raised his dagger, cutting the soft skin of Gollum's arm. Gollum screamed, pulling back as his arm bled dark red. "You hurts us." Harry raised his dagger again. "I do not want to hurt you, but leave now, Gollum. Leave and you shall see no harm befall you." Gollum screeched again, climbing atop the rock. "Sneak, sneak," Gollum called out, making Harry sigh. This was one tough conversation when Gollum seemed to not respond to anything he said. It was only the shiver that ran down his back that alerted Harry to what Gollum was doing. "You bastard!" Harry yelled, lunging at Gollum, who skittered away. His smile stretched over his too large head. The two beasts emerged from the shadows, matted fur coated in grime, and the smell they carried with them was laced with death and decay. Their teeth glowed in the moonlight, long canines dripping drool. Luck seemed to be on Harry's side, as they did not have riders. This was just a pack of large, hungry wargs. Harry turned and lurched into a roll, picking up his sword and quickly drawing it from its sheath. He held his staff in one hand and his sword in the other. The beasts grumbled and growled out, approaching in a stalk. "Come on," Harry muttered to himself. "Break ranks." He stood, watching them approach, his eyes following each step they took. Finally, one to the left took the lead, rushing head first to Harry. He ducked and stepped out of the way of the gnashing teeth and large body that would have knocked the air from his lungs. The move seemed to spurn on the other one to attack, and so it began. A dance with two wargs. Harry had learnt a lot over the years since he had come to this world, but one thing that he'd learnt that was invaluable was how to fight, and how to fight well. He knew if he had these skills as a teen, Voldemort would have been beheaded and stabbed to death long ago. It seemed his mind had wandered, distracting him. Harry yelled out as one of the great beasts who had been circling attacked, their teeth sinking into his shoulder and making him drop his sword. Using his staff he twisted, feeling the meat of his shoulder pull away with the teeth as he blasted the warg in the face, burning the fur as the stench of cooking meat began to permeate the air. As they yelled and danced around, trying to extinguish the flames, Harry was quick to pick up his fallen sword. A heavy swing beheaded the beasts before they could escape. The fire would erase any trace of his being here. Harry could feel the bulbous eyes watching from the darkness. "Curse you, Gollum," Harry muttered under his breath. He sent a silent, stinging hex to the creature, hearing Gollum yelp and scuttle away. At least now Harry could be left alone. He would have to hide himself from Gollum and the creatures of the area better. Harry pressed a hand to his shoulder, feeling the stickiness. He had to leave this place now. It's beginning to kick off in the direction of the start of the Lord of the Rings, which is exciting. I have the story all planned out. Hopefully I plan to keep writing before life gets in the way. Lots of love to you all. X. Boromir walked along the trail leading to the farmhouse, the reins of his steed in his hand as he led the way. As the clearing came into view, he let a smile cross his face. Over the years, this place had become more of a home than Minas Tirith or Osgiliath or any town in Gondor's lands. This little ramshackle farmhouse nearby the stream. As he approached, he paused as he saw the door was pushed open. Blood dried on the frame. Boromir drew his sword, dropping the reins as he approached quietly. He pushed open the door, the light that came through the windows lighting the room. He looked around. Nothing was out of place or overturned. There was no broken items or furniture. It looked just like it should. There had been no fight. His eyes were drawn to the bed on the far side of the room and the figure who lay face down across it and the red that had stained the white sheets. No. His sword clattered to the floor as he ran to the bed, pulling Harry into his arms. Harry! Harry! Harry moaned as he was jostled around. Oh, thank the gods and all that is good. Boromir breathed out as he swept the hair from Harry's forehead. Harry, you must awaken. What happened? Boromir let his eyes travel over Harry, taking in the torn shirt and the bloodied bandage wrapped around his shoulder. Across his chest looked like long cuts that had scabbed over, although his legs seemed to have been protected by the leather. Boromir? Said man looked down at the whispered words, pressing a kiss to the lightning bolt scar. I knew I should never have let you go alone. Boromir bit out, more in anger at himself. Don't be silly. I'm okay, just had a nasty run-in with some wargs, and you know I've always been terrible with healing, so the wounds keep bleeding, Harry said, wincing as he tried to sit up in the embrace. Boromir kept him still in his arms, holding him tightly. You made my heart nearly stop. I thought you were dead. Harry felt Boromir bury his face into the uninjured side of his neck. Harry curled his arms loosely around the other's waist. I'm fine. I promise you. I just need to sleep most of it off, Harry mumbled. Boromir sighed. Why must I always find you half dying and then look after you while you sleep away the days? Harry huffed. Only the second time. It's hardly always. Still two more than I would like. Boromir replied as he pulled back, brushing his fingers over Harry's cheek. Come, let us get you cleaned and those wounds dressed. Boromir methodically helped Harry undress and set about getting fresh water and making up some bandages from a clean sheet from the linen chest. Wiping Harry down gently, Boromir took the time to inspect each wound closely. He threw the dirty rag to the floor once done. Soaking the strips he made in mead, he began to wind them tightly around the cuts and wounds. Harry hissed at the burn of the alcohol, but put up with it until Boromir was done. Harry was pulled to his feet as Boromir quickly changed the sheets on the bed. Harry was soon ushered back into the clean bed and tucked in with the blankets. I'll start a fire and then I'll be back, Boromir said as he pressed a kiss to his dark-haired lover's brow before leaving to get some wood from outside. He found his steed grazing in the field and was thankful that she was smart enough to stay. Taking off his saddle and bags, he took her to the stables for water and a feed before closing the stable doors and moving to chop some firewood. By the time the fire was gently flickering and warming the farmhouse, Harry had fallen asleep. Boromir stripped off his own clothes and cleaned himself off with another wet rag. Throwing that one and the bloodied one into the fire, Boromir watched it alight and burn quickly. He made sure it had become ash and the fire burned low again before climbing into the bed. Harry turned into the warmth even in his sleep, making Boromir smile, wrapping a thick arm around his love and pulling him to his side. Despite the scare and the small part of him that cursed Gandalf for sending Harry to such a dangerous place, it all paled in the feeling of having Harry back by his side. The only thing in his life Boromir was sure about, and knew he was meant to be. What does it say? Boromir asked. Gandalf wishes for me to travel to Edoras and to see if I can see how far the White Wizard's powers have spread. From there I am to make my way north to Dale and the mountain pass to speak with the dwarves. Harry sighed. It will be a long trip. Boromir pressed another kiss to the hair and squeezed him closer. I feel as if we only just were reunited. I can probably leave in a week, Harry said as shifted to lean back into Boromir. I'm sure your father won't miss you for a few more days. Boromir smiled, his eyes darkening. I will not be missed. Pulling his young lover back to bed, Harry went with a chuckle which soon turned to breathless moans and whispers. Harry saddled Granger, due to her familiar messy mane, and should Hermione be out there listening, he named her in affection Promise. His horse, the farmhouse boarded up and ready to sit empty while Harry took this trip. He expected he'd be gone for a year or two, possibly longer depending on what Gandalf asked. Harry hoped that he'd be able to drop back to Gondor to see Boromir. Even if it wouldn't be in the quiet of their little farmhouse, he could at least see him in the White City. His fingers touched the chain that hung from his neck. The metal ring on it nestled against his breastbone, above his heart. Boromir had given it to him before he had departed the day before, a token from Boromir himself and a promise. It hadn't fit Harry's more slender fingers, and not wanting to change it by trying to use magic to resize it, he transfigured a chain and had kept it around his neck instead. It was from Boromir after all. He didn't want to alter it in case it was changed beyond repair. He felt the weight of the ring around his neck, a reminder of the home he had built and was leaving behind. As Arnie's flew overhead, Harry turned up his face into the sun and smiled. Hi everyone, here's another chapter for you guys. It's finally kicking off towards Lord of the Rings and the Fellowship. Only another chapter until we start off on our journey. I'm super excited for you all to read what's to come. Year 3015. Harry had learnt a great deal about cavalry and riding a horse. He had found his relationship with Granger had become much more in tune and easier. She seemed to know what he wanted, and their connection was stronger too, from what Harry could see in the magic around them. It was all due to Theodred, the future horse master of Rohan, and his uncanny ability with the animals that they were so well known for. He had found a kind and spirited friend in the man, with his wild hair and his penchant for riding young bucks for fun, just to feel the thrill. Alongside Theodred was his cousin, Eomer, who was stoic and hard-headed, and Harry always felt like the man needed to take a leaf from his cousin and learn to loosen up. The three men were seen about town, both guardians and guides for Harry. Harry finally found peace and quiet with Theodred's cousin and niece of Theoden, Owen. She was beautiful in a way that reminded him of Ginny, long soft hair that shone like gold but with the fierce spirit of a true Gryffindor. Harry had tried to speak up with Theoden that the young girl had wanted to learn alongside her brother and cousin, but the old man had stood firm. She was to be the maiden of Rohan, the one who would stand in until Theodred had a wife of his own. He learned about riding and fighting, how to handle both spear and javelin on horseback, and to even learn to stand and shoot from his saddle while moving. His archery was still abysmal, and Theodred took as much pleasure in ridiculing him as the twins did. Harry had put ivy in the man's pants when they had gone to bathe as punishment, and Theodred swore he'd itched his bollocks hairless. Harry had only laughed himself hoarse as he watched Theodred walk around with his hands down his pants and being smacked by Owen for being vulgar. The evenings spent in the main hall, fires burning in the grills kept them warm, and the mead in tankards kept his cheeks pink and heated. Arnie's proved himself once more that he was a talented carrier for messages, as it became commonplace for the folks of Rohan to see Harry writing on rough parchment, or to be seen wistfully staring at a letter, or gently putting pressed flowers into his book that he carried with him. Theodred took great amusement in Harry and his supposed lover, a girl who must be as delicate as the flowers she sent. Harry kept tight-lipped though, but took great amusement in the thought of his Boromir as a delicate maiden. For it was Boromir who sent him flowers that he collected when he was out patrolling, or from the gardens, or from the markets of Gondor. He had said he was not skilled with a pencil, but he could send the real thing to be even better. He had spent nearly 9 turns of the moon with the people of Rohan, and he had earned his place amongst the horse riders and men as one of their own. Harry soon had to bid farewell to Rohan and to his new friends, promising to write as well as he ventured north at the behest of Gandalf. He did not know or foresee Grima Wormtongue, who had slipped into Rohan a few weeks prior to his departure, and who would begin to whisper in the ear of Theoden under the orders of Saruman the White. Gandalf was trying to corral as many of the races together in what was the inevitable. The fires of Mordor only continued to grow brighter, and the attacks on Osgiliath and other farms along the border were growing more frequent and brazen. It didn't help that others were taking advantage of it all too, with pirates and bandits running amok in every village, even some in Rohan and Gondor. Gandalf had warned Harry that his journeys would be arduous and long, and even lonely. After months with the people of Rohan, being on the road again had been quiet and Harry had been pensive. His letters had been his only salvation, and the company of Granger and Arnies when he was there was welcome. Harry traveled to Dale and to the mountains there, seeking counsel with the king under the mountain, Dane, and with the people of Dale, with Bard as their councilman and ruler. They had been unwilling and immovable with his message from Gandalf and their need to mount weapons and their forces against the coming threat of Mordor. They didn't trust a young man, unknown to them, despite his letter from Gandalf and Bilbo himself, who both Dane and Bard were familiar with. Harry stayed no longer than he could, moving on after a few nights boarding to Rest Granger. He didn't feel any sadness or remorse like he usually did when leaving a place, having been met with nothing. From there, Harry traveled many weeks to go around Mirkwood, the strange forest too dangerous for Harry to navigate alone, at the advice of Gandalf. He instead had to trek through the brown lange of the large plains around Mirkwood, which had been a hard and arduous time. There was scare cover and the day's rides were hot, even with Harry conjuring a breeze for himself and Granger. He traveled the old Forest road, the way rocky and taking many days and nights, until a familiar sight was to be had. The sound of the waterfalls, of the quiet burble of the streams and the soft melody of nature had been soothing to his travel-weary heart. Coming back to old friends after these years apart had been welcome indeed. Harry lay in his bed, the same room that Elrond and Arwen always kept ready for him, the bay windows letting in the cool breeze. His fingers traced the rough hand scratched out on the parchment he held above his head. He could read it just by the moonlight, already having committed it all to memory. His lips pressed over the last line of the letter, signed with love in black ink. His other hand curled around the ring which never left his neck. Boromir and Faramir had fought and won back Osgiliath from pirates and pillagers. He felt his heart finally ease with the knowledge his lover, and the man he thought of as a brother, has survived the ordeal after weeks with no contact as they battled to control the port city again. Morning, letting Arnies rest before he would be able to fly back with his response. He fell asleep easily, dreaming of tall grass and dark eyes, and a place he once called home. Harry broke apart the bread into small pieces, his fingers fiddling with the small soft bites without coming near his lips. His brow was furrowed as he looked over the latest letter from Gandalf. He was coming to Rivendell and he did not bear good tidings. The scrawl of Gandalf seemed to have been done hastily and ripped from a larger piece of parchment. "What is the matter, Harry?" Arwen asked as she took a seat on the bench next to him, her hand brushing his long hair and his elven braids that the twins had twined in when Harry first arrived. "Gandalf is on his way here. There seems to be something urgent he wishes to discuss with Elrond and myself." Harry handed the letter over for her to see. Arwen blinked, once, twice, and then gently folded the paper. "I don't think the Vala have shown any visions to Father, but this may be something larger at play that we cannot see yet. It is definitely troubling, but I think it was mostly because of my venture into Mordor. Gandalf was very troubled to hear of the number of orcs I saw. They're continuing to almost double in numbers, and they're starting to spread further, towards the shores of the river and towards Gondor." Harry rubbed his brow. "But another reminder that we are on the brink of another war. We mustn't let Sauron return. We will be prepared." Arwen murmured and placed a hand on his arm in comfort, her thoughts already praying to the Vala for luck. Things are about to enter the Lord of the Rings main storyline. I kindly remind everyone that this is based off the books, and there will be some direct references and dialogue pulled from the book in parts, but I have tried to limit this and take my own spin on things. Hope you enjoy X. Year 3017. Gandalf had brought troubling news indeed. He had come flying into Rivendell on the back of a mare, and had immediately called a meeting with Elrond. Bilbo had been long-lived, even for a hobbit, and his ailing health, even living in Rivendell, with a master healer like Elrond on hand, only proved that the ring had cursed him with a longer life but had made the extended life hard and full of pains and aches. Harry had been instructed to go to Hobbiton and to help guard the ring, while Gandalf was to search for another who knew of a ring, one from Bilbo's tale and who Harry had met in Mordor, Gollum. Before they left their separate ways, Gandalf had asked Harry to accompany him on part of his journey before he was to travel to Hobbiton. It had been a welcome trip, finally being able to catch up with his mentor and friend and to learn more magic and ways of the Maya. Gandalf had been impressed with Harry and his growth since he had last seen his young progeny. He had been well impressed with Harry's warding and his new few tricks of learning to make food grow from small seeds he kept on his pouch. It had been handy when food was scarce when traveling, and Harry said that he always gave back to the land with any scraps left and made sure never to introduce a new plant into areas where it would cause havoc by running wild and killing the local flora and fauna. Harry asked about his adventures off traveling and his luck with recruiting, and in turn Gandalf asked to hear about Gondor and Rohan and the friends he had made. When Harry was asked about his paramour when Gandalf had spied the ring on his necklace, Harry just had smiled wistfully and told of their letters and his loneliness and his wish to see his Gondorian again. Gandalf had only puffed his pipe, and had said that it may be sooner than expected with everything happening with the ring. Their final stop and their parting way was Lothlorien, the great forest city of elves. It was the first time Harry had ever visited, and he had been awed by the towering trees and the sounds of the forest. It was so different from Rivendell but so alike as well. Harry has admired their beautiful homes, set in the hollows of the trees with winding stairs between each trunk and walkways connecting them high above the ground with boughs and branches. Soft lights and candles hung in beautiful blown green glass lanterns, which reflected emerald rainbows across the forest floor. He drank from the water of the creek which flowed through their city and felt it invigorate him. He lay beneath the canopies of their trees at night and listened to the silence of the forest and the sounds of life starting and rising with the sunrise in the morning. The most interesting thing had been meeting Galadriel and her husband. Harry knew she was one of the 3 holders of the Rings of Power. However, it was another thing to be confronted with her shining being and the beauty and light she radiated. "Welcome to Lothlorien," Galadriel said, her voice melodic aloud but also echoing in his ears. Harry had stood back as Galadriel and her husband had each clasped hands with Gandalf in greeting. "Hello," Harry said with a polite nod, although just like with meeting Elrond, he felt a little out of place meeting these elves who were considered royalty. Galadriel was older than Elrond even, and one of the first and oldest. He felt his eyes meet hers and his body went rigid as he felt the brush against his mind. The familiar feelings of invasion, and his mind was thrown back to being in Snape's dungeon classroom and his occlumency lessons. But instead, this was gentle, unevasive, and the presence merely was there to whisper into his mind. "I see you, Harry Potter. I know your story and your journey here, for the Vala have chosen you. I see you and your fate, standing on the edge of a precipice that will ensure the survival of our world or the destruction of it should you fall to darkness." In his mind, Harry could see himself standing in a darkened space, his hair wet and slicked back. The floor around him was red and glowing and his face and hands coated with blood as he laughed and laughed. Harry jerked in her mental hold of him, but the next image she showed him was one he knew and felt calm. Storm gray eyes and dark hair surrounded him, soft whispered words and comfort and the feeling of coming home. "You are here to find your purpose. Gandalf had guided you here to a turning point. For the next time you return, you shall be alone and you will have to find your path for your feet to tread. You will have multiple paths laid out for you. Choose wisely and true and you will be guided back home." If Frodo carried the Ring of Power, Harry knew he would have to be there for his friend. It was a heavy burden to carry and not one Harry would wish on anyone. Gandalf had warned him of the ring and touching it. For with Harry's past and the wound on his soul from the Horcrux, there was a high chance the Ring of Power would try to sway him and control him. Galadriel had sought him out a few more times during their stay while Gandalf and Harry had perused their great library. Harry had been adamant with Galadriel, like Elrond and Arwen as well, that he did not wish to know his fate or any future that they saw for him. He was content with the now, long since giving up on finding a way home. Middle-earth has become familiar and comforting for him, and his friends that he made along his travels reminded him that he was never alone in this world. After their stay there, Gandalf had asked Harry to return to Hobbiton to keep a watch over the ring, while Gandalf would approach the other wizards to gain their support as well. He would venture north again to find Radagast the Brown and then journey to the Blue Wizards of the East before finally visiting Saruman the White again. Harry, you must keep Frodo and the ring safe. I know I have asked you to keep your powers hidden, but I fear that we must break our silence. You are a Maya, one of the great forces who will help shape this war. I trust your judgment and your strength. Gandalf had told him as he had stood by his saddled mare, his hat lopsided as usual and his staff in hand. If anyone comes for you, you must flee the Shire with the ring. Harry embraced his mentor. The tingling along his shoulders and neck was ominous indeed. I promise, Gandalf. I'll keep a low profile, but I'll do what I need to do to keep Frodo and Hobbiton safe. I will come to see you in a few turns, when I have found what I need, Gandalf promised, smiling his usual gentle smile and then striding his horse, before he was off, galloping away from Lothlorien. Harry had only stayed a few days more, gathering his scrolls that he had copied from their books, things he thought might be useful for himself or for Boromir or Faramir, before he left early in the morning, heading back to the Shire for the first time in many years. Harry sat back against the side of Bag End, the soft breeze ruffling his long hair and the grassy top of the Hobbit hole. He had been here now for over a year, staying in the comfort of Bag End and under Frodo's care. He had his hand around a teacup, a pot next to him to top him up as he took in the view of the Shire. He had to admit this was one of his favorite places. The hobbits were just such a peaceful bunch, even if they did love a good party and drinking to the early hours of the morning. Harry, want some second breakfast? I think Merry and Pippin will be stopping by soon as well. I heard they were heading to the creek today, so hopefully they have caught some fish to share for tea, Frodo said as he ambled out, his usual green vest over his long-sleeve shirt and his hairy feet bare. Second breakfast sounds delightful. Let me come help, Harry said. While the stay in the Hobbit hole meant he had to stoop a lot of the time, by the time he was seated at the kitchen table he usually was okay, although he did have to fold his legs away to the side. As they ate their breakfast and talked about what they would do this evening, they were interrupted by Arnie's flying low through the open kitchen window and landing on the table. You're early, Harry said as he scratched Arnie's under his beak and his chest, picking out some of his berries to feed him as a treat as he got the letter from his pouch. You weren't supposed to be back for a few more days, at least. Is everything all right, Harry? Frodo asked, his brow furrowed and his curls over his eyes swaying as the hobbit looked between the falcon and the letter Harry was reading. Gandalf is on his way here, Harry explained as he set the letter alight from the candle on the table between them. Why, I never. It has been quite a few years since we last saw Gandalf. I feel like it might have been since Bilbo's 111th birthday, even when he had left to go traveling. Frodo exclaimed, excited for a visit from his old friend. I'll have to make sure I still have the good snuff for his pipe. Harry let Frodo bustle about and be happy for the impending arrival of his old friend. Harry knew the contents of the letter spoke only of a dire situation and bad news which was too dangerous to write about, so the Grey Wizard was coming to Hobbiton to meet them. Harry was bracing himself for the worst, and he knew it couldn't be anything good. It was late one evening, only a week or so since his letter, that Gandalf arrived. They all sat around the table and to the ring that lay innocently before them. They had all seen the writing that had glowed within the golden band when set upon the coals. It was the one ring then finally confirmed, the same as was written within Isildur's scroll that Gandalf had read in the Gondorian library. Frodo had been appalled at the story Gandalf told of the one ring made by Sauron and the changing ownership, with the ring betraying each wearer, from Isildur to Gollum to Bilbo and now Frodo. Even more troubling was that Frodo could not bring himself to destroy the ring. Instead he would put it in his pocket and forget that he'd done so. Gandalf had explained to both of them that the ring has a mental power and sway over those who wear it for its own self-preservation. I wish it need not have happened in my time, Frodo whispered aloud, even as Harry and Gandalf both sat with their eyes on the ring. Gandalf shook his head and reached out, touching his friend on his shoulder. So do I, my dear Frodo, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them or us to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And I believe that we have been planning for this day for many years now. It is merely the beginning we have been waiting for." Frodo looked confused. "Planning? How could you have known this was the One Ring?" "I did not know it would be the missing ring of Sauron, no. I knew Bilbo had a magic ring, one that was imbued with the power of invisibility. But I did not suspect anything more until I was able to research. But Harry here has been able to see that Mordor was becoming more active, with more and more orcs being seen around the rivers and on the borders of Gondor. We knew that something was stirring in Mordor. Now we know it was Sauron. He has awoken, and will be recuperating his power and army. He will be seeking his ring, won't he?" Frodo asked, his face ashes. "I am afraid so, Frodo." Gandalf took out his pipe as he began to pack it, a distraction for his hands and magic to do something. "Harry, Gandalf, please just take the ring and destroy it. Cannot be left here. I do not think I can keep it here, if it has a hold on me already," Frodo implored, looking between the two wizards. "We can't, Frodo. Gandalf already told you why we can't. The ring holds such sway, even more so over ones like us who can wield magics," Harry said, not even wanting to touch the ring, as he felt its call and influence just like a Horcrux. Harry wondered if he could conjure fiendfire and whether that might destroy the ring. It was something he could hopefully test once they were away from the Shire. "It isn't safe here anymore, is it? In the Shire?" With Gollum revealing that Bilbo held the ring to Sauron, Frodo trailed off. He felt his heart stutter with fear and also excitement. He had been wishing for adventure since he was a young hobbit, to leave the Shire and to see Middle-earth. Was this not a chance to leave and to protect the ring, until another could take the burden on and carry it to Mount Doom? Harry looked to Frodo, his eyes taking in the strange expression on his younger-than-his-age face, already nearly 50 but looking as if he were only a young hobbit of 20 turns. "We can't carry the ring, but that does not mean we will abandon you. We will stay with you on your journey to the Cracks of Doom in Orodruin, where we can then cast the ring into the fires from where it once came." Gandalf nodded as he puffed his pipe. "Yes, a long journey is ahead for us all." He turned to the window, and also it seems for one who listens in on private conversations. It had taken a few weeks before Frodo has been able to pack his things and to sell Bag End reluctantly to his cousin, Lobelia Sackville Baggins. He hated it going to such a disagreeable woman, but it was best to keep the home in the Baggins family. After all, they were Baggins from Bag End, and that was just how it always was and hopefully always would be. The Hobbit was almost being stubborn about it all, despite his excitement and his talks with Harry about all the places he wished to go and see on their journey. Maybe it was saying goodbye to his home for the meantime and with no idea on when he'd be back. Harry wasn't sure entirely. But Frodo finally managed to organize his affairs. Gandalf had already departed, promising to meet them at the Prancing Pony once they had left the Shire. He had awoken one morning and said he had received troubling news in a dream from the Vala. He hadn't explained much more to Harry, only that he would be in contact as soon as he could again and to send Arnie's out in a week to find him. They were now packed and ready to leave, and Frodo was being escorted by Harry and Samwise Gamgee, who Gandalf had caught eavesdropping the night they had discovered the One Ring. Harry had laughed until he had choked, unable to even take a breath as Merry and Pippin had done a strange half-naked dance on the kitchen table, their strange jig wobbling the table topside to side until it had cracked in two entirely and had sent the two hobbits tumbling, their ale still somehow unspilt and their tankards upright despite what had just happened. Fatty had brought his pipe, and the smoke seemed to make them all suspiciously a bit more giggly and giddy than usual. Their night was spent laughing and eating and drinking with their small group of friends until the sun had risen, and they had all fallen asleep with full bellies and smiles on their faces, even in their sleep. Harry turned back to look at Bag End, the cart that was being pulled ahead of them laden with supplies and Frodo's furniture to be moved across the river. He had come to love this place and this home, as he had come to love all of Middle-earth. But there was something about the Shire of Hobbiton and its peacefulness and the vivacity of its inhabitants that seemed to calm him down and provide him with peace. There was few places that Harry could ever relax unguarded, and he had counted this home as one of those places. As they were heading off, Harry kept to the back, separate from the group and disillusioned with a soft cloak of magic around him, which made anyone who looked at him would only see a blur which would make them rub their eyes, and by then, he'd have walked away. They had discussed that this may be best, for the people to think that Harry had left separately. For hobbits, while curious creatures, were also wary and distrustful of strange occurrences. What a sight it would be to have Harry escorting Frodo Baggins off with all his belongings. They'd think Harry would have been forcefully walking the poor hobbit off for his exile and doom. Granger was being led by Fatty, Merry and Pippin with the cart across the river, and Arnie's had left the night before with a letter for Boromir to tell him that he was leaving the Shire and would be meeting Gandalf again soon. He did not mention the ring, or anything to do with his new traveling companions, but he had made sure to stamp a blot of ink next to Journey in his letter, a code that they had come up with signifying that they were on a route that was dangerous. There was a stranger, down by the Gamgee house, who was talking with the gaffer, Sam's father. Harry could only see the black cloak, and the figure was at least the size of a large man, and human, with his hands and feet being seen. Harry could hear Gaffer telling the man that there was no Baggins here anymore. Harry could see the cloaked figure nod and then move on, mounting his horse. The figure turned to look at the hobbits, lingering on Frodo for but a moment before they pulled on the reins and left. Was this the riders who Gandalf said would likely come? Agents of Sauron already searching for Baggins in the Shire? Harry hoped that they would be able to leave Hobbiton and cross the river without issue. They had encountered the rider a few more times on the road, each time narrowly escaping. The elves who were headed for the Grey Havens had taken them in. Some of them from Rivendell who knew Harry once. He had removed his magic to be seen, and they had been welcomed into their party with open arms. Harry enjoyed speaking Elvish again. Even Frodo spoke with them. Their feast that evening had been joyous, filled with song as the elves welcomed them as friends and the hobbits danced and drank. Harry told the elves to be careful of the Black Rider he saw in Hobbiton, not disclosing anything about the riders searching for them, of course, but merely that they were likely foe. It seems the elves were already on alert, from sensing it already of having already had a run-in with the riders themselves. By the next morning, when the hobbits awoke, Harry had breakfast ready for the two who were no doubt hung over from their wild night. The elves had departed earlier, and Harry had been up to say farewell to them and to wish them well on their journey to the Grey Havens. The close encounter the days before and loosing the protection of the elves had Harry suggesting that they take the shortcut through the fields between Woody End and the Brandywine River ferry. It would keep them off the main road where the rider likely was patrolling and provided more protection and cover. It had been the right choice, as no sooner had they left the road, keeping to the underbrush on the side, that they were passed by a rider again. The terrible screeching cries that they heard as the riders met up, as their black horses whinnied and tossed their heads, showing their agitation. "We must make haste. They seem to know we have left the Shire," Frodo said as he shouldered his pack higher. Sam nodded, eager to get away from the eerie riders and their black steeds. "We should keep to the fields. The riders won't be able to navigate there, and we should be fairly hidden," Harry said as he ushered them further away from the road. "Farmer Maggot should be nearby too. We need to be cautious, as he can create a ruckus if he sees us in his fields," Sam added, and Harry nodded in agreement. "Let us make good time today, and hopefully in a few nights we should make it to the Brandywine ferry," Harry said, walking behind the two again to offer protection to their backs. Harry couldn't help but cast a look back over his shoulder as he eyed the road. They needed to keep away from the riders, or their journey would be over before it even started. "I hope you all enjoy X." Tom Bombadil was probably the most strange fellow Harry had met on his journey through Middle-earth. For was he a man, since he had been alive for many years, before the times of the Rings of Power being made and even in the times of the Vala? Or was he Maya, with his tricks and songs which spoke of powerful magic to break spells and to bewitch the eye? "Come now, young man," Tom had said as he thumped Harry on the back as they sat in his home deep within the woods. "Drink up. I dare say you have a journey ahead of you, one to rival the ones from your past." Tom laughed and drank deeply from his cup as Harry just narrowed his eyes at this man. Seeing this, Tom just winked a weathered eyelid and smiled into the rim of his tankard. Both he and his wife only spoke in roundabout words and riddles when questioned about who they were and what they were. It made Harry all the more suspicious. Gandalf had never mentioned this strange fellow, which made Harry wary of the purpose of their good intentions and inviting them in for tea. The hobbits, having picked up Merry and Pippin and Buckland, were of course unaware of the tension in Harry, already jolly and drunk and singing songs around the table. "Frodo," Harry said sharply, as the hobbit had begun telling Tom and Goldberry of how they came to leave the Shire. Frodo seemed to be in a trance, not hearing Harry or his tone as he continued, Tom continuing to listen with that smile on his face. "Frodo," Harry said again, standing this time to reach next to him and to shake his friend from whatever drunken trance he was in. "Show me this precious ring," Tom said jovially, in the middle of Frodo's rambling, the glint in his eyes sparking. Harry had drawn his staff right at Tom's face, his free hand stopping Frodo's around his arm in his pocket. "That is enough questioning, stranger," Harry hissed, the air around the table darkening with his mood. "You overstep your bounds. We are grateful for your kindness in navigating the barrows, but we should really be in our way. Come now." It was all in good fun. Harry narrowed his eyes at the man, Frodo thankfully now out of whatever magics had bewitched him, looking between them with blinking eyes, as if he didn't know what had just transpired. "We'll be on our way now," Harry said again, ushering to his friends. "We have overstayed our welcome and we have someone we must meet. Come now, Istari. You need to rest." "I will jest no longer," Tom said, waving his hand absent-mindedly, as if he could sweep away the sour taste in Harry's mouth. "We haven't slept in a bed in days, Harry. Let us sleep tonight before we go." Merry whined, his words slurring. The other hobbits agreed in mumbles. Harry could see that his companions were all drunk as skunks, so it would be a lost cause trying to navigate them in the dark in the barrows, which had already seen that they'd lost their way on their own. He could only sigh in frustration about hobbits and their comforts. He didn't like it, but he went back to pulling apart the bread on his plate with a furrowed brow. It was only after the hobbits had all passed out and were laid to bed that Harry slipped out, standing outside the house to get some air from the smoke and smell of booze. He wasn't alone for long as Tom came out, pipe in hand as he leant against the other side of the doorway, looking out over the clearing of their haven. Granger was tethered to a tree, grazing as she rested from carrying their extra gear for their journey. "You'll be the one who's come from another land?" "I?" Tom said around the puff of his pipe. Harry blinked at the shock of the reveal, turning sharply to the man. "How do you know that?" "I may not be one of the Istari, but I've known the Vala for many years. They like to still whisper to me every now and then," Tom said as he let out a curl of smoke from his nose, smiling up at the sky. "They said you'd be needed here. You got their book?" Harry nodded, his lips pressed in a thin line. Did he dare trust this strange man and his word? "You'll be able to open the book when the time comes. Don't worry, it will help guide you when you need it. But for now, trust in your magic and your heart," Tom said, turning to pat Harry on the shoulder as he ambled back inside, leaving Harry to ponder over what secrets and knowledge Tom Bombadil held and kept close. Harry stayed out a little longer, looking up at the starry sky before he too was called by the realms of sleep, moving inside as well on quiet feet. The next morning they awoke to a freshly cooked hot meal again, the smell of grease rousing them from their slumber. They savored the food and the quiet talks, much more subdued than the night before they washed and packed up, ready to head out on the journey again. Before they said their farewells, Goldie had packed them some extra food and provisions to see them through the next few nights. For each of the hobbits Tom presented them with a dagger, long, leaf-shaped, and of marvelous workmanship, laid with serpent forms in red and gold. Harry eyed them and raised a brow at Tom at the rather Gryffindor and Slytherin vibes. Tom unsheathed the dagger from a black sheath, wrought of some strange metal light and strong, and set with fiery stones. He told them that the blades were forged many years ago by men of Westoness. They were foes of the Dark Lord, but they were overcome by the evil king of Carn Dum in the land of Angmar. "Few now remember them," Tom murmured. "But these swords are long enough as swords for hobbits. Sharp blades are good to have if you go walking east, south, or far away into dark and danger. Be safe, young Istari." Tom replied, "The Vala are watching over you." Harry knocked hard on the door to Bree, the hobbits in tow, huddled before him. They were drenched and cold, shivering with the sudden downpour and the late-hour chill. "Hello. Please let us pass. We are travelers seeking board at the Prancing Pony," Harry shouted, banging again on the closed doors of the town. "What if they come?" Frodo whispered, looking over his shoulder as if the riders they just evaded will suddenly appear from the darkness. Finally, the doormen came and let them through, letting them into Bree. Harry hurried them along, having stayed at the Prancing Pony with Gandalf before and knowing the way to the small stable by the inn to let Granger have a rest under the shelter away from the rain. "Give me a moment," Harry said, pushing back his wet hair from his eyes as the hobbits all huddled under the stable roof. He set about unsaddling Granger of her extra bags, shouldering them and having the hobbits take the smaller ones. They were able to get 2 rooms on the upper floor for the hobbits, with Harry having a room 1 floor down in a room suited for men. Barliman, the owner, seemed to remember Harry from his visits with Gandalf, having kept a letter on behalf of the wizard behind the bar for Harry. It seemed Gandalf was not here to greet them after all, which was troubling to Harry as he knew his mentor was not one to break his promise of meeting them here. It was only once they were all settled in their rooms, having washed and cleaned themselves from their rough time in the rain, did the hobbits gather in Harry's room to read the letter from Gandalf. Frodo read the letter after Harry had skimmed it, the other hobbits clustering to read over the other's shoulder. "So Gandalf will not be meeting us, then, to the great halls of the Lord Elrond," some exclaimed. "My word. Who would have thought us hobbits would be making our way to one of the great elven cities?" "Our adventures continue," Pippin said, making Frodo sigh and shake his head as Merry cheered. "All right, let us go get some food and mead before we head to bed. We should be safe from the riders in town, and hobbits are known to frequent the Prancing Pony. Just don't tell anyone your real names for now." They made their way down the few flights of stairs, for pairs of hairy large feet and 1 boot-clad making their way to the inn's dining room. Harry was looking forward to a nice, quiet meal and then having a warm bed to lay his head in. Harry and the hobbits sat in one of the tables near the far wall, away from the bar where most of the men of Bree had already been sinking cups of lager for most of the evening as they were rambunctious and rowdy. He didn't want to get caught up in the throng of people, just waiting for a hot meal and a drink to stave off the cold evening. He really was exhausted after the running they'd been doing to evade the Black Riders, the Rings Wraiths. They carried with them such a putrid scent of death, and the magic that clustered around them seemed to stain even the air and earth. Harry could only hope that, with their leaving of the Shire, that they would draw the riders away and the beautiful sanctuary of Hobbiton would remain untainted and untouched. A chuckle was the first response. "I see that you're still as grumpy as ever." Harry turned, looking up at the man behind him, a familiar smirk seen beneath a dark hood. "Estelle." Harry stood to embrace his friend happily, clapping the taller man on his back. "I assume you're the old friend that Gandalf said would be our escort?" "That would be me," Aragorn said in response, pulling back his hood enough for the hobbits to see his face. "Good evening, Master." "Hobbits, this is Aragorn, or as I know him by his elvish name, Estelle. I met him when I was living in Rivendell," Harry explained. "Aragorn, these are my traveling companions. This is Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin. I'm afraid their last names elude me for now. I must be awfully tired." "I feel we should return back to our rooms," Harry said with a faked little yawn. "Why don't you grab us some more mead to take upstairs before bed?" He turned and strode back to the bar, Merry and Pippin scrambling after him to get some more for the hobbits. Harry stood as well, leaving Sam and Frodo at the table. "I'm just going to ask for our meals to be sent to our room instead." Harry had a quick word with the barman who grumbled but complied with the room service when Harry dropped extra coins on the counter, and turned back to see that there was a scuffle with Frodo and some men who were stumbling around from drink. He quickly strode over as he spied Frodo and Sam struggling with the drunken men. He didn't miss the way Frodo's hand had gone to the ring he wore instinctively. "Why dash?" Harry began, but it was too late. Frodo was shoved by the drunken man, making the hobbit topple backwards. The ring he had been fingering slipped perfectly over his finger as he disappeared. Harry stomped his foot against the stone floor, a wave of power that he sent out unseen by everyone but him as it located Frodo, who was now huddled under a table. It seemed the drunken men had barely noticed the incident, Luckily Aragorn had been there to redirect their attention with mead. Harry strode over, yanking Frodo out from under the table and taking the ring off his finger forcibly. Harry almost dropped the ring as he felt the blackness crept into his mind. He could feel the black voice already whispering. A shiver overtook him, racking his body and raising the hair on his neck. He shoved the ring into Frodo's palm, steering him towards the stairs. Harry was quick to round up their group, gesturing to Aragorn with only a nod, and he could see the ranger handling the other two rambunctious hobbits and their mugs of ale. "I'm so sorry. I know you and Gandalf said to not," Frodo started, but Harry just gave his shoulder a squeeze. "Not here." Harry grit out, still on edge as he felt the black tar-like feeling oozing over his hand and his mind. They briskly walked to his room, and Harry waited until they were all inside before he layered it with every bit of magic he could. He began to pace around, his hands clutching his arms, hugging himself as he tried to will away the sensation of the ring. "I don't know how you can stand to be near that, Frodo," Harry whispered, shaking his head again as if it would dislodge the ring's influence itself from his mind.
"I'm sorry,"
was all Frodo could say. Harry ran his fingers through his hair, shaking his head at himself. "No, it's not your fault, Frodo. But we're in danger here. They'll have sensed the ring." A knock at the door had Estelle appear with the rest of the hobbits in tow, all holding jugs and Aragorn a tray of steaming bowls. "Did anyone notice?" Harry asked, helping relieve him of the tray onto a small side table. "None." They were all too deep in their tankards to notice anything but their own noses, Aragorn said, shedding his thick coat. "What happened?" Sam asked, coming over to Frodo's side. "I was pushed and the ring. It was somehow on my finger. I don't know how it happened to even be on my finger," Frodo said miserably. "Why can't he wear his ring?" Merry asked. "It made him disappear. This magic of a sort," Harry explained. "Although I fear it will now draw the attention of our Black Riders." "Oh dear," Sam muttered, sitting on the chair. "It's fine. I have warded the room so they won't be able to find us. We'll be in for a long night here until we can be sure they have moved on from searching. Hopefully they believe that we have already left Bree," Harry said, beginning to pass out the bowls of soup. "You sure you'll be able to keep them away?" Pippin asked, looking out the window into the darkness. "What, after all these years you still don't trust me?" Harry tried to joke. "Well, of course I trust you. It's just that the Black Riders were also frightening and there were more of them than us. I will protect you all, that's what Gandalf asked of me." They sat on their beds and began drinking and eating, ravenous for a warm meal after their travels. "When did you meet Gandalf?" Harry asked. So Estelle began his story of how he and Gandalf had captured the creature Gollum, taking him to Thranduil in the elven city Mirkwood. How Gandalf had told him that Harry had been staying in the Shire with Frodo and the impossible ring that he had hidden away. They had parted ways. When Gandalf parted, he promised to meet at Sam Ford again, where they would travel to the Prancing Pony together. "But then he did not show on the day we promised to meet. So I waited 3 more days and nights and he still did not show. So I made my way here alone," Aragorn explained. He turned to Harry. "When we last spoke he had said he was going to visit the White Wizard." As if summoned, there was a tap at the window which made Merry and Pippin scream, Frodo jump up and Sam go white as ash. Aragorn lifted a finger to his lips, making the hobbits go quiet. Harry pulled his staff and dagger, nodding to Aragorn, who approached the window. "It's a raven," Aragorn said, peering through the streaky glass at the beaded eyes staring back. "That's a mark of Saruman," Harry said, stepping forward to look at the bird. They were still protected behind his wards, so the bird couldn't see them, but it must have felt something to be attracted to it. "Maybe it's here because it's looking for Gandalf?" Frodo said. Another screech from outside made the hobbits jump again. Harry recognized that call, not surprised at all when the raven was dive-bombed from above. A caw of its own was torn from its beak as sharp talons ripped into its feathered back. "Good boy, Arnie's," Harry murmured, watching as his bird fought off the raven. There wasn't much to see in the dark of the street, but the sounds of their vocals echoed and caused even some people to spill out from the tavern below to see what the commotion was about. It wasn't long before the black bird was winging away. Arnie's landed on the sill, and Harry quickly opened the window, offering his arm as a perch for him. Good boy. Fighting off that evil bird. Harry scratched his head and breast feathers. Why did that bird come here then? Mary asked. I think it was meant to be a messenger, Harry said, going to his bowl to feed Arnie's the last bit of bread left. From the White Wizard? Why would he send you a message? Estelle asked. I know you haven't met him. Gandalf told me that he had kept you secret from the other Ister. He did. He felt like the Vala had sent me here for a reason. He knew that the other Istari had forgotten their virtues and their purpose, that they had fallen from their journeys from the Vala. Even the White Wizard. But he's one of us, Mary exclaimed. Gandalf always said he was a good one. But why would he send a raven then to spy on us? Frodo asked. Was it meant to deliver a message? Possibly. But if Arnie's attacked it, I suspect it would have been only bad for us. Harry sighed, scratching at Arnie's back now. What I do think is that Saruman knows about Gandalf, whatever has happened to make him miss our meeting. Harry said softly, and that our journey together is about to part like a fork in the road.